a portion of our current labor force, which is unregistered, and that is our migrants, rising economically inactive portion of the population. We do have an aging population. There is underemployment. There is high and rising youth unemployment. We have less inflows of FDI. We do have a worsening of the ease of doing business environment. So there are some inherent challenges which have become open because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we've had declining hydrocarbon resources, so that where other sectors were called on to produce, because of these inherent structural challenges, they have not been able to do so.
Now, I understand that there is always a need to contextualize information and not necessarily ignore the shocks associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. What you are speaking of, was there before the COVID-19 pandemic as well. The report, and even Dr. Roger Hussain, he speaks a lot about the rapid growth of Guyana when analyzing the report, and he says that it was fueled by extensive revenues generated from its production of hydrocarbons. And I understand that, but even throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Guyana's economy did not necessarily slow down. Now, is it even fair to compare Trinidad and Tobago's economy to that of Guyana's, given their hydrocarbon boom?
Well, it depends on the purpose of that comparison. In economics, comparing growth rates between economy is a usual occurrence, especially for economies that are in the same geographic space. However, what I would like to highlight, it is important for the analyst and for the general public to understand that Guyana, in terms of its structure, in terms of its economic mechanisms, is very different from that of the Trinidad and Tobago economy. In the first instance, Guyana is a relatively young hydrocarbon producer, while TNT is a much more mature producer. I focus on that because the factors conditioning growth in either of those two economies are very different. So that while we would want to just, blanketly compare growth rates between economies in the region, one must understand that there are differences in terms of population size and per capita income, the transportation network, the information communication technology infrastructure, land mass is different, the capacity for physical expansion is different, and of course the relative development stages of financial systems in either economy. So the factors which condition growth in either economy is different because we are at different productive stages.
So then it's not necessarily reasonable to even say that we, TNT, given all those factors of which you've just mentioned, and particularly the point is Guyana is still in its very early stages of its hydrocarbon industry compared to Trinidad and Tobago's. That being said, it seems unreasonable to suggest that we can learn lessons from Guyana. It seems more so that Guyana should learn lessons from TNT.
In this economic space, I think lessons can go both ways. So consider, for example, that Guyana has benefited extensively, and this has been documented, benefited extensively from the technical expertise of Trinidad and Tobago nationals. Even so, if I'm not mistaken, last year there was an MOU between Guyana and some of the energy professionals within Trinidad and Tobago to be able to undertake several technical projects. Even so, Guyana stands to benefit from the Trinidad and Tobago experience in terms of managing its hydrocarbon future. But Trinidad also has a lot to learn from economies in the region. In particular, let us consider the fact that Guyana is focusing heavily on maintaining its environmental integrity. And that is something that I think, just off the top of my head, that TNT can learn and TNT can consider in our industrial explorations.
But people are going to ask, how is even conserving our environmental integrity beneficial to our economy? I mean, we are very much into the hydrocarbon market. It's obviously declining, but we have established ourselves there. What benefit is it at this point for TNT to even conserve its environmental integrity?
Well, the environment, the physical environment couches every economic policy, every economic action, and there is an impact on the environment, anything that we do. Trinidad and Tobago is one of the highest per capita generators of carbon dioxide, for example. And as a mature petrochemical producer, we expect this. But in the context, the global context of environmental change and climate change, maintaining the environmental integrity is important for longevity of the economy, because this physical space is what couches and is what it is the boundary of economic development. Because if it is that you don't have a facilitative environment, then long-term well-being can be compromised.
Mm-hmm. So we have an understanding of what the issues are here in TNT, even a bit of an understanding as per the causes. But in terms of solutions, in terms of both monetary and fiscal policy, I mean, at this time, in your opinion, what policies are absolutely necessary, for the stimulation of our economy? How, have you seen concerted efforts on those in authority in implementing policies that can lead to positive growth?
Sure. So definitely what is needed at the local level is a system by which we can incentivize foreign exchange earning or generating foreign exchange. So I would encourage and I would focus on and I would endorse and emphasize those types of interventions that incentivize the generation of foreign exchange. And one that comes to mind is definitely the Phoenix, for example, the E-Tech Park, the most recent of which, of course, is the Phoenix Park project. That has, and projects like that have the potential to expand our foreign exchange earning capacity. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I would focus on systems that reduce or transform the transfers and subsidies and turn that somehow into capital injections. And we know that capital, of course, expands and encourages the expansion of production. So just really focusing on and honing in on any type of interventions that encourage foreign exchange generation.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned something earlier, which is underemployment as well as a declining labor force participation rate. Again, I understand what is causing that. What is necessary to address those, at least in the short to medium term? Could we address it in the short to medium term?
So underemployment really is a labor market. It's an ongoing labor market challenge. What is necessary is incentivizing employment and incentivizing the employment environment, so that ensuring that, for example, you have frequent negotiations of wages, you have improved standards of employment, even reduction of crime can help to boost labor market participation locally and also underemployment.
But I want to also get back to that point that you mentioned earlier, because there obviously would be a connection as well in terms of foreign direct investments and an injection of cash flow into the economy. That would obviously help with underemployment and a declining labor force participation rate as well. That being said, what could investors look at here in TNT? What are they going to see as being, a good investment? It's constantly surrounded our hydrocarbon industry, but again, that is declining, and I don't know why we're trying to run away from that fact. But what is it that investors could look at in TNT as being a sound investment that I can get good returns on?
So I would generally go back to some of the non-booming sectors, as you rightly said, shift away from the hydrocarbons, but focus, for example, on non-traditional agriculture. That has immense potential for Trinidad and Tobago, and it also has the benefit of bolstering agricultural production and food security. So container farming, hydroponic farming, those things that can be done on a relatively smaller scale than traditional farming, that can have long-term benefits for the economy. This type of approach, I know, would have other types of benefits as well, because agricultural population is aging, we know that. Agricultural output has been falling. Right now, it is under 1% of real GDP in terms of economic activity. So there is an opportunity there for local investors to infuse technology, infuse investment, even infuse AI into the way that our food is produced.
Back to one of your other points earlier as well, you mentioned that the ease of doing business is becoming less and less easy. So that term in itself, soon we might have to actually, come up with another term. But what exactly is causing that? I've heard of the, bureaucratic red tape and even opening up a bank account, to the extent that 72% of bank accounts here in TNT. 72% of businesses do not have a bank account here in TNT, and that is also an issue in respect to money laundering. But exactly what is causing this difficulties, associated with establishing a business, beyond just even opening the door to your business? It's getting everything in order. What's causing this difficulty?
I myself am not sure, but it shows up that weakened ease of doing business situation shows up in a lot of bottlenecks, and as you rightly said, it shows up in the complaints of these persons who are wanting to open businesses, facing these challenges, and it remains one of the key policy focus areas as part of the cadre of policies that is required to improve our business spaces.
Now, finally, Dr. Gokul Boslan, what can you say about our short to medium outlook here in TNT?
Okay, so according to the report, and the data shows that in the medium-term period, growth is going to pick up for the TNT economy of about 3%. But we need to be mindful that in 2024, 2025, 2026, which is our medium-term period, the level of economic activity is still not going to reach the 2015 levels. And that is something, yes, we have positive growth, but in terms of the whole economic activity, it's not going to reach that 2015 level. That being said, we take the growth for sure, but alongside that growth, we need to ensure that we build the momentum to deal with some of the other oscillating economic challenges that we are having. Access to foreign exchange, which will likely impact access to imported goods in the medium term. We do need to keep abreast of what is going on with our external debt situation, because it is getting very, very close to the level of our net official reserves, and that is something that does not augur well for our medium-term period.
Of course.
And of course, we need to manage crime and citizen security so that, yes, we take the growth, but how do we build from the momentum that is a positive economic upturn alongside dealing with some of our challenges that are inherent and very, very present.
Do you think that we will ever return to the levels we saw in 2014, 2015?
In terms of the numbers, we would be auguring very close to 2015 levels after 2029, and that's just, and that's just a statistical reflection of the numbers itself. But what we need to focus on as an economy is ensuring that long-term well-being, given our current resources, are maintained, that livelihoods are maintained, that the quality of life of our citizens is at the utmost front of every discussion that we have.
Indeed. Dr. Gokul Boslan, I want to thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning. Thank you for the time, for coming, and also thank you very much for your part in authoring this report. All the very best to you.
Sure. Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care. All the best. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not have to add anything further. Dr. Gokul Boslan was kind enough to explain to us, what is happening in our economy, and even going into what we can expect in the short to medium term. But the last point that she made is very important. We are going to face a lot. We have faced a lot. We're going to continue to face a lot. It's a matter of also trying to maintain a certain standard of living, a good standard of living for our citizens here in TNT. And things such as addressing the crime rate not only helps with that, but it also augurs well for business. We know about that. Business chambers have spoken so much about it. Business chambers are now investing. Business owners are now putting together their money to purchase security cameras for areas, and not just for their business, for areas of commerce. But, ladies and gentlemen, I pause there for now. We take a break here on the program. We will return shortly as we continue this morning's edition of AM Prime.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm not to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of this game.
not
Let's go to the last part.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region.
Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us this morning. Now, last week we spoke about non-productivity and the factors associated with non-productivity in the workplace. This morning we are having a conversation that one of the factors in particular that affects individuals is burnout. But burnout could also have implications on an employee's ability to really put their best foot forward. And by extension, it could have implications on businesses and the economies. It is an issue that we've heard of time and time again, especially following the COVID-19 pandemic. It's something that we are still, I believe, learning to deal with. I'm joined this morning by the individual who joined me last week to speak about non-productivity, of course, Ms. Lara Quentrell-Thomas, and she's again in studio. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back. My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm pretty sure you heard constantly about burnout in the workplace.
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more of an issue. I mean, I think there's an idea and understanding of what burnout is, but why is there, or at least to me, there seems to be a failure in recognizing burnout and dealing with it?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's really part of this whole conversation that has been catalyzed by COVID about mental wellness. It's part of that whole conversation that we're having both within our workplaces as well as an economy, right? Looking at ways that we can support people's mental well-being and mental health. And certainly from an HR point of view, the phenomenon of burnout, if you wish to call it that, and I should preface all of this by saying I'm not a psychologist. I'm somebody who owns a business, so I obviously have employees, and of course as an HR professional, a topic that I'm very interested in and aware of. But I think COVID really shone a spotlight on the many pressures that many people feel. And what we as employers, and even I think as citizens, as human beings, have to do is learn to recognize the symptoms, whether it's in our co-workers, in our friends, family members, and certainly as a manager, in my team members, in my staff, and really try and find strategies to A, understand, and B, of course, remedy if possible. So a lot of the work around burnout that's being done now is, on the one hand, understanding where it comes from, what it looks like, and then on the other hand, what can we do as employers, as a country, to really understand that this is not people faking or just not wanting to work. It does impact productivity, of course, so that is connected to productivity. And I read a study, I've got some notes here just to make sure I don't misquote, but the UK did a study in 2022-23, so this would be just kind of a couple of years after COVID, looking at workplace-related stress, depression, anxiety, which are all symptoms of burnout. And they reported 875,000 cases, so their population is about 70 million in the UK, which resulted in an estimated 17.1 million days of lost productivity. Whoa. So I think the reason I raised that statistic is to understand that this has a direct impact on our national productivity. So the number, in the UK, 17 million days lost in workplaces and industry because of burnout. So I know we haven't done the maths here, but I think that it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that people who are spending 4 hours in traffic a day, don't have job security, don't know whether their contract is going to be renewed next month, have the anxiety, the external anxieties of crime, food prices and so on. It doesn't take a genius to connect that to not just underproductivity, but disengagement in the workplace, but also their lack of mental well-being, and obviously resulting in burnout. And there are many, many symptoms and characteristics of burnout that we have, I think, a responsibility, certainly the HR profession and managers, to be on the lookout for.
Do you suppose that, you mentioned a study from the UK, and we have not done a study here in TNT. The last study that we really learned of was from the ECA and focused on traffic and lost hours, which of course you just reflected as being part of the problem. But do you think that burnout has become part of the norm?
Well, I do think we have, in many cases, we've created or perhaps copied a culture that I know in the US is very prevalent, where people are afraid, for example, to take time off because they worry about being replaced. Or if I'm not in the workplace, my boss realizes that he doesn't really need me and he can probably do without me. So the numbers of people in the US, for example, who don't take vacation are quite staggering, and Sherman and other organizations have done studies that people literally work themselves to the bone, right, until they just get too ill to work. I think we have some of that in Trinidad. We love the, I'm so busy, and I said it to you when I arrived, right? How are you? I'm so busy. we like to feel busy, but we sacrifice, I think, many times our own mental wellness, certainly as women, because we're taking care of everybody else. As managers coming out of COVID, we're trying to rebuild our businesses, we're working longer hours, and we're not necessarily focused on, you know, first of all, making sure that we're okay before we reach out. It's like on an airplane, right? Put your own mask on first.
Yes.
So I think that philosophy is very important. There are some countries where shorter working weeks are being looked at. Of course, paid vacation is an important thing, but something that we've done at Regency since COVID is we've introduced mental health days, for example. So my staff, every 2 months, or there's one day every 2 months they can take, just because they just don't feel like coming into work. It's not a sick day, it's not a vacation day, it's just a day where, you know what, I just need a break. And I think that for us, I mean, we're a small organization, but there are very innovative ways that employers can really help support their workers who look as if they're suffering from burnout. But we also, I think, have to be brave enough to say, this is where I am, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, I need help. Many employers offer EAP, as you would know, and there's a ton of providers. Even online, there are support groups. So even if your employer is not offering any kind of EAP, you can go online and reach out. There are many, many support groups for people suffering from different aspects of burnout. So it really does start with yourself. As RuPaul says, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love anybody else, right?
What does burnout look like in an individual? What does it look like to an employee? What does it look like to an employer?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that, because I did, again, as I said, I did a bit of research because I'm not the expert. So according to the psychologists, and I was reading up Gail North and Herbert Freudenberger, I presume Europeans, I didn't get quite that far, but...
I think so.
Burnout is a syndrome associated from chronic workplace stress. So we're looking at it very much as workplace oriented, as opposed to other stresses in your life from family or finances and so on, okay? And it really happens when it's not being managed properly. Because there is stress that's good stress, right? We know that stress can motivate us, get our adrenaline pumping, get us to perform, but there's also very bad stress, very negative stress. So there are 3 dimensions to burnout. Feeling exhausted or depleted is one. Feeling increasingly distanced from your job or very negative about your job or your workplace. And then those 2 things leading to the reduction in your efficacy as a professional. So you're starting to see your performance reviews slip, you're not delivering in the way that you are accustomed to delivering. And there are actually 12 stages of burnout. So I thought it was interesting just to kind of quickly go through them with your viewers, because people may see themselves in one of the stages and think, oh, okay, I need to address this now. So the first stage is compulsion to prove yourself. So this is where you're working harder, taking on more just to show your employer that I'm worth it, right? I'm an important asset to the team. The second stage, working harder, doubling down, pushing yourself, maybe working longer hours. The third stage is neglecting your needs. So this is where you start to miss exercise, you start to eat badly, maybe you skip medication, you're not taking breaks as often as you should. The fourth one, displacement of conflict. So this is where you start to blame other people on your stress levels. So it's other people's fault. Number 5, revision of values. I thought this was very interesting. This is where work becomes your priority to the detriment of family and friends. So you're basic, and you're probably even thinking about, if you think about these steps, people in your life who never have time for you, you know, and we all work hard and we're all busy, but you obviously have to make time for the, you know, the positive things in your life. The number 6 is denial of emerging problems, and this is where you start to blame others, you start to avoid responsibility. Number 7 is withdrawal. This is where you begin to avoid social interactions. I'm not busy, I can't come out, I've got too much going on, I'm too exhausted. And you may even turn to alcohol and drugs to help manage your stress. Number 8, behavioral changes. So this is where you begin to get aggressive, impatient, or maybe just generally very sad, and people know you not to be a sad person. And number 9, depersonalization. Start again to detach, but you start to think that life has no value. This is where you're moving into the stage of depression, right? So what's it all about? What's it all worth? Number 10, inner emptiness, which is avoiding or dreading social interaction, again, maybe using alcohol or abusing alcohol and drugs. 11 is depression. So this is starting to feel really bleak. There is no future, there is no hope. And then number 12 is burnout syndrome, and that's total collapse. So if you think about those 12 stages, and I think they're very insightful, you may know people in your lives, in your workplace, that some of those resonate with you and say, yeah, this person used to be really jolly and always, ready for a Friday night lime and, could be counted on to come to the cricket at the weekend. Now we're not seeing them anymore. What's going on? So I do think, the idea about workplace burnout is really a sort of a dual responsibility on the individual to recognize the signs and help themselves, ask for help, but also for the employer and the managers of teams, supervisors, to start to recognize the symptoms. And because life is so fast-paced, so demanding, sometimes this cycle can happen very quickly. This is not necessarily 12 steps that take you 12 years. This could be a 12 months, this could be a 6 months.
Yes.
You go from just suddenly, being a little sad to being completely burnt out.
Do you think it's possible to break this cycle, to break this issue of burnout? Do you think it's something easy to...
Absolutely. I think the first step, of course, is to recognize the symptoms, both within yourself and in others. And then the second thing is really about asking for help. I do think employers must recognize that the world that we live in is very challenging. Just, whether you're, entry-level employee or you're a senior executive, life is challenging, it's demanding, it's stressful, the crime doesn't help, the traffic doesn't help, the heat doesn't help. There's so many things going on in people's lives. And I think a big thing in Trinidad as well, and I heard your previous guest talking about underemployment, this whole idea of lack of job security, people feeling very, not just underemployed, but totally unsure about their future job prospects. So you can't then build a life, you can't apply for a mortgage, because so many people are on contracts, for example. So that sort of insecurity about the future, especially if you've got a family. So we have to recognize that there's lots of different factors. And then we have to stage intervention. So one, like everything, let's start talking about it. Let's start educating ourselves. Again, we're so grateful and thankful to have the internet, that there's so many online webinars you can attend. If you start to see some of these signs in yourself, stop and reflect and think, okay, I've got to do something. You have to prioritize your own well-being, because you cannot perform at work, love your family, be with your friends, if you yourself are not whole, or at least mostly whole. So I think it's important to start talking about it, have the conversations. Again, like mental health. Prior to COVID, maybe in the Caribbean and Latin America particularly, talking about mental health, nobody talked about mental health. You were either mad or you weren't. And now we recognize that there are so many things under the mental health umbrella that people are coping with, that we have to find ways to support them. They have to find ways to support and help themselves. So I do absolutely believe that if you're at step 2 or step 3, you can stop the trend.
No, that is from an individual's perspective, but in terms of an employer, even proactive measures. You mentioned about Regency even having or offering employees one day every 2 months, a mental day. This is just to try and help the situation.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to go into the topic of a 4-day work week. That's something that we're going to need. That's a completely different topic.
Yeah.
What are some of the proactive measures that you think businesses can implement to help employees?
Right. So of course, one of the obvious ones is offering the option of remote work or hybrid work, right? Because we know that sitting in traffic in this country directly contributes to reduced productivity and it causes stress. Nobody could argue with that. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's certainly a phenomenon. So where possible, offering remote work, hybrid work, and of course the tools and training and management systems to support that, right? Talked about mental health days. Wellness, a lot of firms now are doing wellness activities. showing webinars, having conversations in the workplace, training managers and supervisors to spot the signs is really important. The same way we would have done some years ago with victims of domestic violence, you know, training our leaders in the organization to identify the signs and then obviously stage interventions. We have also at Regency a wellness allowance, which is not huge, but it encourages our staff to do physical activity, and then we reimburse them for part of the cost. So whether you join a gym or you go horseback riding or you go kayaking or whatever it is, a physical activity, because again, science has shown that physical activity leads to, you know, better wellness. Engaging the family in activities as well, making sure you, I think employers are not meant to be your parents. I'm not suggesting that. But if you have a workforce that you want to get the most out of in that 8-hour day, you need to find ways to ensure that they are well, they are healthy, their minds are focused on the work, focused on the customer. And if they're not, then it's to your detriment as well, right? Your brand starts to suffer. So this is the right thing to do as a human being, but it also does, I think, have a positive impact on the bottom line. And we talked again, 17 million days lost productivity. So if you started to measure,
that is incredible.
Yeah, the lost productivity in your organization, I think you'd be quite astonished.
Now, as we are coming to the end of this particular segment, and again, thank you very much for making the time to come in.
My pleasure.
Any final thoughts or messages that you would like to share with those who are viewing? Because burnout is it's a real thing that people, I don't think they are looking at themselves enough and say, listen, I really need to look after myself. I need to probably implement certain measures or steps to try and avoid getting to number 12 on that list.
Yeah.
And even to employers. Any thoughts or messages?
Well, I think, again, it's like any kind of challenge or illness or anything that you're struggling with. The first step is to really say, I need help. Ask for help, ask for information. If your employer's not giving it to you, go somewhere where you can get it. And I am glad that this is a topic that's on the radar now nationally, but you know, we still have a stigma, I think, especially men, talking about, you know, going for therapy or going to talk to somebody about their mental wellness. So I do think it's important to, you know, recognize in yourself if you're suffering any of those symptoms I mentioned, or in the people that you love, the people that you work with. As employers, we have to educate ourselves. So I would say the first step is really, and I would encourage anybody who's watching to start learning about this. Do some reading, do some research, and then you become aware of it. And then I think that helps you start to recognize the signs and then stage interventions when needed, including on yourself. So maybe you have a trusted friend or a pastor or a doctor or somebody. If you see any of those signs in yourself, please ask for help. Please reach out. Let's, you know, remove the stigma. Let's start to break down some of these barriers and have open conversations. But you know, you're no good to anybody if you're no good to yourself.
Indeed. Ms. Laura Quintrell-Thomas, thank you so very much for joining us once more on the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a great day.
See you again very soon.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break on AM Prime. We'll resume shortly.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sierra Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. 5 shot dead in 24-hour spate of violence across TNT. Shigona's East MP slams the National Security Minister over crime. Gary Griffith questions government's decision to terminate SSA head's contract. And internationally, Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup. Now for the details. Within a span of 24 hours, Trinidad and Tobago witnessed a tragic surge in violence as 5 individuals were fatally shot in separate incidents. The victims have been identified as Marcus Williams, aged 44, Kevin Hospitalis, aged 42, Ricky Rupnarine, aged 43, Kendall Hodges, age 39, and Anthony Marichou. These incidents occurred across both Trinidad and Tobago, with 4 deaths recorded in Trinidad and 1 in Tobago. Former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith is raising concerns over the government's decision to terminate the contract of Major Roger Best, the head of the Strategic Services Agency. Griffith says that the government has not provided justification for Best's dismissal, leaving questions regarding the grounds for his termination unanswered. Chaguanas East MP Vandana Mohit has leveled accusations of neglect against National Security Minister Fitzgerald Hines regarding her constituency. Addressing a UNC press conference held on Sunday at the party's headquarters in Chaguanas, Mohit criticized Hines for purportedly failing to take action to combat crime and ensure the safety of citizens. She highlighted the recent abduction of Anisha Hussein, the daughter of Source Doubles proprietor, as a poignant example. Hussein was reportedly kidnapped in El Dorado on Saturday. In international news, the Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup against President Felix Tshisekedi in the capital Kinshasa involving Congolese and foreign fighters. DR Congo Army spokesperson Brigadier Sylvain Ikenge said that 50 suspects, including 3 Americans and a naturalized British citizen, have been detained. He previously said that on the state-run broadcaster RTNC-TV that the situation is now under control. His statement comes hours after armed men attacked the house of Vital Kamerhe, former chief of staff and close ally of the president, early on Sunday morning. Witnesses say a group of about 20 assailants in army uniform attacked the residence and an exchange of gunfire followed. Well, that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sierra Ali. Thank you for watching.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
Because the vision doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. We focused a lot on the economy this morning, and just now we spoke about business as well. We're continuing with that trend. As my next guest, I welcome to speak about, we're starting off the conversation, of course, about, bank accounts. I mentioned earlier, 72% of businesses across TNT do not have business bank accounts. But there are implications for such, of course. And the Minister of Finance has spoken about, financial security, not necessarily trusting the banks or the bureaucratic red tape surrounding that. That needs to be dealt with. But what about loan financing, for example, which can be beneficial to business? Let's get into that as I welcome Darren Jacobs. He's a financial certified professional and a senior insurance agent. I welcome him to the program. Good morning, Mr. Jacobs. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let me start with that statistic, an eye-opening statistic. 72% of businesses do not have access to business bank accounts. I mean, as a financial individual, a financial professional, is this something that is concerning to you?
It is very concerning because a lot of businesses and business owners don't realize the position they place themselves in without having let's say the relevant banking information, right, or relevant bank account. And that has issues with taxes, it has issues with getting financing for their business. There are a lot of issues that would arise from not having such relevant bank accounts.
Mm-hmm. What are some of these issues?
Some of the issues would be financing, right, and also really registering or tracking of their businesses, because you'll find a lot of the times most small business owners who don't have business bank accounts, the issues that they would arise with or they would have is not passing money through their bank account. So let's say, for example, a person who is an electrician, right? And this person's an electrician for many different years. He has a lot of clients and he would receive cash, but he will not put his money in the bank account. And when it is time for him to access any kind of financing, he would have a problem with the bank stating that he has no track record of these money. So you don't know where, from a financial perspective, you don't know where these funds come from. It could come from proceeds of crime. It could come from all different aspects. So it's really tracking the money and where, to show how a track record of where the money will come from.
Mm-hmm. And of course, accounting, as you just mentioned, could be detrimental to a business in very many different ways.
Correct.
Now, one of that you've also pointed out is perhaps even accessing loans,
mm-hmm.
or borrowing money from financial institutions. Mm-hmm. But there is this sort of at times apprehensive approach to borrowing money or accessing loans.
Mm-hmm.
But you've made an argument, which is why you're on the program this morning, that there are pros
mm-hmm.
to actually accessing loans. Let's explore those pros this morning.
So I would say having financing would give you immediate access to large lump sums of money that you would not have had before. So let's say you're the same example of an electrician. If it is this electrician wants to purchase a vehicle, right? A lot of times he will not have the large lump sum of cash to purchase this vehicle. And why should he use all of his available liquid money to purchase a vehicle? That's why you take financing. So you will spread out the purchase of this asset over a long period of time, where you are able to recover a lot of the costs that you would have been spending to purchase it, and it gives you a lot more leverage in terms of expanding the business in a shorter period. Same as though it gives you a sense of growth in your business. So your business has a much greater chance to grow at a much shorter rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I understand that. But business owners or potential business owners, I say at the same time, even though it allows me to recover what I've borrowed or what I've spent over this particular period, I'm also in debt to this financial institution
Correct.
for however long I take this loan.
Correct.
So that in itself will add to the stance I think I'm going to hold back from even approaching a financial institution.
You see, there's good and bad debt, right? So bad debt would be if you have a credit card and you use your credit card to purchase trivialities. You're going to buy clothes, you're going to buy this, you're going to buy that. Things that not really benefiting you. But if it is good debt, would be you take a loan to purchase an income earning asset. So it could be a property, it could be a vehicle for your business, it could be assets for the business, could be tools, could be different things that you would have had to save up over a long period to be able to purchase these assets. So that's why I would say it's very necessary for you to have access to these kind of financing.
What do you think that people need to consider before even, thinking about approaching a financial institution for loan financing?
Their current situation, their current cash flow, their current ability to repay, because a lot of the times one of the cons in taking a loan is if it is you default on the loan, or if it is you look at taking a loan from a place where the interest rates is so high that you can't facilitate it, and that's where people comes into problems along the areas of taking a loan to begin with.
But in that regard as well, people will they're considering their current position, but if they find themselves in a position where they need loan financing, they're not, right now things are not looking necessarily healthy. I need to access money in order to keep my business going, in order to keep my business running and prop it up. How is it that they go about doing such? Financial institutions here in TNT have become risk aversive. They're not necessarily going to go and on the word of an employer or the word of a business owner who may be well known and say, all right, we'll give you this chance. That's not going to happen.
Correct.
So then again, if that be the case, what do they consider? If it is that they're in a position where it's so unhealthy and banks have become so risk aversive, they're not necessarily going to be looking at loan financing.
You see, it boils down to the individual, and the individual, their specific position. If their position is one where the loan financing is all that they need in order to make their business a success, they may need to look at alternative methods, not necessarily going directly to the bank. They may look at angel investors, they may look at there are other areas to take a look at, things like money lenders, who may not give you the amount of red tape the bank will give you, but they will still offer you the amount of financing they're looking for. Be it, there are pros and cons to that, because you would have higher interest rates and other factors that would have to be taken into consideration in that instance.
So do you think banks make it difficult to access loan financing? Do you think that there is too much bureaucratic red tape?
I would disagree. I don't think they make it difficult. I think as any institution, they look at the risk, and if the risk is too high for them to accept, then they won't accept the risk. Now, again, if it is you running a business and you take on a client and you assess the risk of that client, then you would know if this is a good deal or a good move for you as the business owner. So is the bank just doing their due diligence?
Now, that being said, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You said good debt, which, again, you're going to have to explain, if you please.
So there's good debt and bad debt. Good debt could mean, I would say good debt is anything that is adding to a business or helping generate some sort of income, right, or an asset, right? So let's say good debt could be rental income, a rental property, right? So if there's you work out the maths on an apartment and you have enough units and the amount that you would generate from that apartment is more than enough to cover the loan as well as provide some cash flow for you, that's a good debt. That's good debt, right? Bad debt would be you're taking a loan to go and play mass.
That's something a lot of people do.
A lot of people do that. That's horrible debt.
I want to move forward then to what you mentioned as well about defaulting on the loan. I mean, the cons as well. I mean, we've looked at the pros. I mean, you've spoken about how, accessing loan financing could be very beneficial to a business. Could allow for the business not only to prop itself, but also to expand. It could also allow the business to invest more in itself. So I understand that. But, as a certified financial professional and an individual who has been in this field for quite some time, what, in your opinion, are some of the cons? You say they're like, I need to be careful what I say now. No, it's fine.
So for me, I would say interest rates. Sometimes if it is you take a loan and you're not able to repay the monthly installments, if they take on too much debt, that will put you in a position where you feel as though you're choking. You can't breathe. You cannot see your way out of this debt. And a lot of persons fall into that trap where they take on too much debt and they're not able to facilitate it. So things around them would raise. Inflation is real, right? So let's say someone takes out, for example, a car loan, right? Mm-hmm. And you know now they're giving car loans for a prolonged period of time, sometimes 8 years, 10 years.
Up to 8 years, yeah.
Up to 8 years. And if it is this person takes out this car loan and they are unable to facilitate the car loan over a period of time, then the bank would repossess the vehicle, right? So you now would be in a difficult financial position where it is you have this bad debt on your name and you're unable to pay it off.
But that doesn't necessarily speak to the interest rate. It also speaks about, as you said, an individual looking at their financial health before even considering this purchase.
Correct. Poor money management are the basis of a lot of issues that people have when it comes to taking loans, because some people think that if they take a loan, that will be the solution to their problem, when in reality, that just adds to the issue.
It could add to the issue. So, poor money management, it raises a point in my head of which I've spoken of before, and I don't think I've spoken of enough, and that is financial literacy. Do you think that is an issue that needs to be addressed?
I completely agree, 100%. It's a very large issue that a lot of people fail to put enough emphasis on at different stages in their career, at different stages in their life. So money management should be taught in schools at an early age, right? Simple things as budgeting, simple things as understanding what a loan, simple things as understand how insurance could benefit a person, simple things at a basic level. Additionally, throughout a person's working career, their life cycle, their needs would change. So as a young professional, a young person who is in their early stages of their career, in their early 20s, right, they would have specific needs when it comes to money management that will be different from a person who is now looking to buy their first home, or who would have just gotten married, or who would have just had their first child, right? Also planning for that child's education moving forward. So there are a lot of areas where financial literacy and understanding how a sound base knowledge of your personal finance would benefit you throughout your life. So I think it's a very understated area that a lot of people don't pay attention to.
So then this lack of understanding, you know, this gap in financial literacy is contributing to the gap in respect to financial inclusion. Not everybody is able to fully access the benefits that are associated with having a bank account or, you know, loan financing, for example, or being accredited with a financial institution.
Correct.
Do you think that banks themselves or financial institutions are doing their part in respect to closing this financial gap?
I would think the banks are. I wouldn't say it's just banks alone. It's a lot of financial institutions. They have a lot of drives now where they educate the public on different areas, right? With the advent of social media right now, all financial institutions provide some sort of educational posts or educational bits of knowledge that people can benefit from. But the problem is, finance is boring, and most people don't like to talk about finance. They like to talk about the good parts of finance, the buying a nice flashy car, a nice home, jewelry, this, that, these things. But no one talks about the day-to-day, mundane, boring stuff when it comes to financing. Things like basic budgeting, household budgets.
That's why we have AM Prime. That's why we have this show.
Correct.
You know? But you're absolutely right. And it's integral that, especially now, if we speak about an unbanked population, when we are even pushing forward with digital banking, when we are pushing forward with e-money financing, for example, it's very, very important to have these conversations. So as we're nearing the end of this interview, what is it, what are some of the key points that you want the public, the viewers, citizens to really understand and to really grasp? There's only so much that we could say in this segment.
Correct. I would say financial planning should make the basis of all of your strategies moving forward. Having a basic understanding of the benefits of having a sound financial plan, and this is something that should remain dynamic. It's not a static plan that you have. It's not a plan that you create today and you forget about it. So I think planning on the whole or seeking the advice of a professional who could help you in this space is extremely, extremely beneficial to any person regardless of their specific position in life currently.
Indeed, Mr. Jacobs, thank you very much for taking the time, and I believe that you often do your part in trying to educate the public.
I try.
So where can people actually get more information in respect to, because I think you post educational videos now and again.
Yes, so I post on all platforms, Darren Jacobs Financial, Instagram, TikTok, primarily operate on those two platforms. I post on Facebook as well and on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Darren Jacobs Financial, on all platforms.
So doing your part for financial literacy.
Yes.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that actually signals the end of AM Prime this morning. I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program, and I want to thank all my guests for their presence and for their time. It is a pleasure indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a good day ahead, a great day, and I'm Keaton Shaw saying, save sweet tea and tea. We could. I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country, and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of have to stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on WhatsApp Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
WhatsApp Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not
game.
no.
Let's go to the last part.
Takes you around the world. Every day, France 24 covers all the ground in all four corners of the world.
Check out Around the World every afternoon here on France 24.
Hello, I'm Annette Young, filling in for Jeannie Godula, and welcome to Paris Direct. Let's take a look at what's making headlines this hour. France and Belgium backs the International Criminal Court after its chief prosecutor seeks arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. Also, funeral rites for Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi and 7 others who died in a helicopter crash have begun. This is a probe into the cause of the accident gets underway. Plus, the first evacuation flights are taking place today to extricate tourists trapped in New Caledonia, the French territory in the South Pacific, which has been massively impacted by widespread rioting. As well, French President Emmanuel Macron says he will now be heading to the troubled territory. But first, both France and Belgium have supported the International Criminal Court in its request for arrest warrants for both the leaders of Israel and Hamas. In the meantime, Israel says the decision is a historical disgrace, while Hamas has condemned the move. The ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, alleging Israel had committed crimes against humanity and that Hamas bore criminal responsibility for actions committed during the October 7th attack, including taking hostages, rape and torture. Jenny Shin reports.
It's a decision that's prompted a strong and swift reaction from both Hamas and the Israeli government. Hamas demanded the ICC cancel the arrest warrants, with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, on the other hand, welcoming the decision.
The Palestinian people have the right to defend themselves. The ICC is required to issue arrest warrants against Israeli officials who are pursuing crimes of genocide in the Gaza Strip.
Meanwhile, reactions of fury from the Israeli government, who slammed the application as a historical disgrace, saying it's unacceptable to mention Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in the same breath as Hamas, the perpetrators of the October 7th attack.
With what audacity do you compare Hamas, that murdered, burned, butchered, decapitated, raped and kidnapped our brothers and sisters, with the idea of soldiers fighting a just war unlike any other, with an unparalleled morality? As the Prime Minister of Israel, I reject the disgust comparison of the prosecutor in The Hague between democratic Israel and the mass murderers of Hamas.
It's a political disaster. It's a moral disaster. After they've slaughtered us and our children on October 7th, there is no such comparison. We won't accept it, and we can't accept it. It's unforgivable. We have and are managing a just war, and it needs to be clear that we will not stay silent.
Sentiments echoed by the Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz.
Drawing parallels between the leaders of a democratic country determined to defend itself from despicable terror to leaders of a bloodthirsty terror organization, Hamas, is a deep distortion of justice and blatant moral bankruptcy.
World leaders also weighed in, with both the leaders of the UK and the Czech Republic blasting the decision as unhelpful in the ongoing war.
Here in France, the first ever trial into the crimes of Bashar al-Assad's regime has gotten underway in Paris today. 3 high-ranking Syrian officials suspected of having played a role in the deaths of 2 French Syrians have been tried in absentia for complicity in crimes against humanity. All 3 are the targets of international death warrants, as Oliver Farry reports.
Ali Mamlouk, former head of the Bureau of National Security, Syria's highest-ranking intelligence authority, Jamil Hassan, former director of Air Force Intelligence, and Abdel Salam Mahmoud, former director of Syrian Intelligence's investigation branch. Those are the 3 Syrian officials accused of complicity in crimes against humanity who stand trial in a Paris court on Tuesday. All 3 are subject to international arrest warrants and are not expected to appear at the trial. They are suspected of involvement in the disappearance and death of 2 Franco-Syrians, Mazen Dabakh, an employee of the French International School in Damascus, and his son Patrick, a 20-year-old student, both arrested in November 2013.
They were at home around 11 p.m. They were eating and talking, and then 3 or 4 soldiers knocked on the door. They wanted Patrick. They entered and took his computer and phone away. They came back the next day and said to my brother, "You haven't raised your son well, so you're coming with us." Since the 2 disappeared, we've never had an explanation from the Syrian authorities.
The family say the 2 men were taken to Meza Airport, one of the regime's known torture centres. It wasn't until 5 years later, in August 2018, that the family received 2 death certificates. The son Patrick is said to have died in January 2014, and his father in November 2017 in unknown circumstances. The French investigating judges say the 2 men, like thousands of prisoners detained by Air Force Intelligence, suffered torture to such a degree that it led to their deaths. Testimonies from dozens of victims of the regime and defectors are expected to feature in the trial, which aims to establish what happened and determine the responsibility of those at the highest levels of the Syrian regime.
And Iranians have begun 5 days of national mourning as the funeral procession for President Ibrahim Raisi begins. He died unexpectedly in a helicopter crash at the weekend in the northwestern city of Tabriz, along with members of his entourage. The helicopter losing communication while it was on its way back. A full probe into the cause of the accident is now underway. Delano de Souza has more.
A sea of mourners filled the streets of the Iranian city of Tabriz. The somber crowds came out to pay their respects to the country's president and members of his entourage, including Iran's foreign minister, who died in Sunday's helicopter crash. A truck carrying the coffins drove past as crowds said their final goodbyes. Over in the Iranian capital, meanwhile, mourners lined the streets with 5 days of national mourning underway.
Raisi was a very popular president. He cared for the people and worked for the people. Besides the Iranian people, he also cared about the interests of the region.
Earlier on Tuesday, the Assembly of Experts gathered in Tehran. The body is tasked with appointing the country's next supreme leader. An internal vote was due to take place to appoint a new chairman, a post which was likely to go to the late Ibrahim Raisi.
We offer condolences over the martyr-like death of the dear friends we lost, mainly the great and precious Islamic scholar, His Excellency Mr. Ibrahim Raisi, our country's popular president.
Raisi's body, meanwhile, will travel from Tabriz to the Shiite clerical center of Qom before being taken to the capital. Processions are due to take place in Tehran on Wednesday, with Ayatollah Ali Khamenei leading prayers later in the day. The coffin will take one final flight to Raisi's hometown of Mashhad, with the burial scheduled for Thursday.
In other news, the German foreign minister says Ukraine urgently needs to boost its air defences in the face of relentless Russian attacks. Making these comments as she arrived in Kiev, the Russian military says it's taken full control of the settlement of Bilohorivka in Ukraine's Luhansk region. Kiev saying fighting is still going on in the area and that 3 attacks in the nearby Svert sector have been repelled. Meanwhile, fighting is still continuing in the border town of Vovchansk in the northeastern Kharkiv in face of what's been described as a relentless Russian offensive. Charlotte Hughes explains.
In the outskirts of Vovchansk, in the Kharkiv region, these Ukrainian soldiers are attempting to hold off Russian advances. Ukrainians claim they still control around 60% of the town. Moscow's forces have made their largest territorial gains in 18 months, since they launched a ground assault in the northeastern Kharkiv region and opened up a new front. On Tuesday, President Zelensky warned that Kyiv needs more air defences in order to hold the front line.
Russian murderers are actively using guided aerial bombs in the area of Chasiv Yar, in the Pokrovsk sector, in the area of Lipsy in the Kharkiv region, and in other combat areas. This brings us back again and again to the difficulties for our warriors and the threat to our cities and communities.
Air defence systems that could protect residents from aerial attacks. This 22-year-old woman was injured when a missile struck the outskirts of Kharkiv. Not long after, there was a second explosion.
I was miraculously alive. Everyone around me within 5 meters died. And the doctor who came to me put a tourniquet on my leg. Then we were hit a second time, and his arm was torn off.
Kharkiv prosecutor's office accused Russian forces of using the double strike to target civilians and then target rescue teams who respond to the initial incident. Moscow has often been accused of using so-called double tap attacks, but insists it only aims to strike military infrastructure. Ukraine, meanwhile, says it is gathering evidence of war crimes in the region.
Moving on, and the first evacuation flights are underway to extricate tourists trapped in New Caledonia, the French territory in the South Pacific. It comes as French President Emmanuel Macron says that he will now be heading to the troubled territory, the region at a standstill after a week of rioting, despite the arrival of thousands of French security personnel to stabilise the situation. In the meantime, both the Australian and New Zealand governments have sent planes to evacuate their citizens.
From the sky over Noumea can be seen numerous columns of smoke, businesses and shops on fire, a sign that the tensions continue. Rioters in New Caledonia have targeted the island's economic core. This transport company's premises have been set alight and a car showroom completely burned out. In the north of the city, pro-independence activists still have roadblocks mounted. On this road, there's no way through.
We're out here this morning having a moment of reflection, just to pay homage to our dead, all our innocent brothers who've fallen. Our fight is a legitimate one. We're just saying, don't take away our benefits.
At this roundabout, traffic is let through, though there is a dissuasive roadblock. But many roads remain impassable. Security forces are gradually clearing the main thoroughfares. A military convoy advances slowly to reopen this dual carriageway. Police are protecting strategic bridges like this one. And for the first time since the start of the unrest, there are signs that things are calming down. In the Magenta neighbourhood in the north of Noumea, one of the worst affected, white flags have gone up, Protesters are themselves clearing the streets of burned-out cars. Young people here want to show they intend to bring an end to the violence.
For 6 days now, our parents haven't been able to sleep, so we want to stop all this. And too many people have died, so we have decided to stop.
Despite 29 arrests on Monday, France's Interior Ministry says things have quietened down in New Caledonia.
And for more on this story, I'm joined here in the studio by our International Affairs Editor, Philip Turl. Philip, just how significant is this visit by President Macron?
I think what we're seeing here is the French president trying to show that he wants to move forward to find an agreement between the indigenous Kanak population in New Caledonia and the Europeans who live there, who are in disagreement about the voting methods. Big question today is, will he be able to do anything? And that is really, I think, very much in doubt. Emmanuel Macron has, to quote the French newspaper Le Figaro, just put up with 7 years of tormented relations between himself and New Caledonia through clumsy comments that he's made over the years, and the paper saying that he doesn't really understand, or at the start of his first mandate didn't really understand what was going on in New Caledonia. He certainly tried to make up for that. There have been several visits to the French overseas territory since then, but the fact that he's going there today shows that this is a pretty serious situation, because this visit wasn't planned, and it could, as many have been forecasting over the last week or so, degenerate down into all-out civil war if peace and order is not restored. That appears to be the case. There are reassuring noises coming out of the Quai d'Orsay, the foreign ministry here, that things are beginning to calm down a little bit in New Caledonia. But remember that over the past week, 6 people have been killed, including 2 gendarmes, in the clashes over the voting methods. And for the moment, both sides don't appear any closer in trying to work out some kind of solution or to come to the negotiating table, and it appears that they don't really want to see each other at all. So I think that's what Emmanuel Macron's prime task is going to be in going to New Caledonia, to say, look, I want to try to reach a solution in all of this. I think you need to start talking. We can't keep pitting one side against the other, because New Caledonia is part of France. There have been 3 referendums held over the past few years, and in all 3 cases, the majority of people have voted for New Caledonia to remain part of the French mainland.
So where does this leave the plan to overhaul voting rules for regional polls, which of course has been the cause of this unrest?
Well,
and will the government still push ahead with the change?
That is the big question, and that of course is not going to be easy for Emmanuel Macron either to answer. Basically, just to whittle it down, if you're talking about legislative elections, presidential elections or European elections, everybody in New Caledonia votes the same as everybody here in mainland France. This is just for provincial elections, and that means that under the agreements that were already signed with France, both in 1988, the Matignon Accords, in 1998, with the Nouméa Accords, it's only people who've lived in the island since 1998 who are eligible to vote, and their offspring. All those who have not been in the island since then are not eligible to vote. The new legislation wants to change that to those who've been in the island only for over the last 10 years, which means an extra 25,000 people will be eligible to vote in those elections in New Caledonia, which form the new legislative council on the ground there, the government that rules what happens in the island. That's why the Kanaks are very upset about it, the independence supporters, because they say they're being pushed into a corner and they will be outnumbered even more, and they won't have a say in what is happening in New Caledonia. So this is the whole point, I think, of Emmanuel Macron's visit, is to say, look, we've got to get back together around the negotiating table to try to work out some kind of solution. If we don't do that, this legislation has already been adopted here in Paris by the Senate, by the National Assembly. I'm going to bring both of those houses together in Congress at the end of June. If you don't get to the negotiating table, we will push this through, and then it'll be too late. So now is the last chance for you to come to the negotiating table to try to work out some solution altogether that will satisfy me, President of France, and the rest of the French people. It's a long shot, Annette, but I think that's the only way the French government can see further forward, even if here in France there doesn't seem to be a complete agreement between all political sides about what the best way forward is.
Philip Turl, thank you for that analysis. Now, Singapore Airlines says a person has died aboard and others were injured when a London to Singapore flight encountered severe turbulence. Singapore Airlines flight SQ321 from Heathrow was diverted to Bangkok. The airline saying the aircraft was a Boeing 777-300 with a total of 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. We'll bring you more details on that story as it comes to hand. In other news, Haiti's main international airport has reopened for the first time in nearly 3 months after relentless gang violence forced authorities to close it. The airport's reopening in the capital, Port-au-Prince, is expected to help ease a critical shortage of medications and other basic supplies. It comes as the country's main seaport remains paralysed as gangs still control 80% of the capital.
I am traveling due to the unrest. I need some calm so I can get some rest, take a break in another environment. If I was safe here, I wouldn't be going anywhere else. I don't like to travel. At my age, I can't stand cold weather.
There are thousands of people who wanted to travel for a certain time who couldn't. I have my tent, which I had to live in for more than 3 months. Many people were suffering. We are satisfied and waited a long time.
And today marks 100 days to go until the beginning of the Paris 2024 Paralympic Games, where some 4,400 athletes from all over the world will be taking part. It also marks the start of a new advertising campaign released by the Olympic Committee in a bid to boost slow sales. Vedika Bahal explains.
We're not missing anything, except you. That's the slogan of the new campaign released by Paris 2024 to encourage people to buy Paralympics tickets after sluggish sales. Gael is a Paralympian for France's blind football team and a silver medalist at London 2012. He's aiming for gold in Paris and is counting on public support.
The public has to be there to support us. It will help us perform. But also, for the party to be great, we need people to share this moment with. And the more there are, the more emotional it'll be.
Time is of the essence, though, as with 100 days to go till the Paralympic opening ceremony, only a third of the 2.8 million tickets have been sold, and largely by the French state and local authorities. But the head of Paris 2024's organising committee hopes that the message gets through.
At the moment, we're in the middle of the sale period for this edition of the Games, so we're not too worried. But it's true that we want there to be the same excitement, the same fervour, the same passion for the Paralympic Games as for the Olympic Games.
The Paralympic Games will take place at the same venues used by the Olympics across Paris. Tickets are available online, starting at €15.
To the US now, and the recovery from that deadly Baltimore bridge collapse has reached a significant milestone as tugboats escorted the ill-fated container ship Dali back to port. Can you believe it that nearly 2 months has passed since the ship lost power and crashed into one of the bridge's supporting columns, killing 6 construction workers and halting most maritime traffic through the port of Baltimore? For more, let's cross now to Fraser Jackson, our Washington DC correspondent. Fraser, I understand the crew is still on board the vessel. Is that the case?
Yes, it's been over 55 days since that crash, and the crew has been on board the ship ever since it happened. There are 21 people on board the ship at the moment, 20 of them Indian nationals, 1 Sri Lankan national. That boat, of course, was en route to Sri Lanka when it hit that bridge, but they have been unable to leave the vessel largely because of visa restrictions. They had a 1-month visa to do their work, and those visas have expired over the time that they were on the ship as the rescue efforts and the salvage operations continued. So they have been unable to get off the ship, and they've also had their phones confiscated for the last month as well, because there's an ongoing investigation by the FBI as to whether there is any kind of criminal liability as well. So they haven't even been able to use their phones in that time, but they have been working. They've been assisting the local crews to navigate the boat and also helping those salvage salvage efforts. Of course, there was a big piece of the bridge that was strewn across the front of the boat, and they were helping the crews to navigate it, to do that in the best and safest way possible. They've also been receiving help from the local authorities, especially with mental health. Of course, 6 people that died as a result of that crash into the bridge has been weighing heavily on the minds of the crew, so they have been receiving some mental health treatment as well whilst on board the boat. But so far, there is no idea how long they will be there, even though they are now still back at port. The authorities who own the boat are trying to work with local authorities so they can get some shore leave, but there is an international maritime law which says that some people have to be on the boat at all times. So for now, they are there for the foreseeable future.
And how has the bridge collapse impacted the traffic both by road and by sea in the area?
Well, the impact has been twofold. One is traffic, and of course the other is the economy. The Francis Keyscott Bridge it had about 30,000 cars a day that would go across it, and there are 2 tunnels that also cross the Baltimore Bay as well. They take a much larger, significant share of the traffic, but 30,000 cars a day is nothing to be sniffed at, of course, and it is a lifeline for the local economy, and also something of a local legend. It was part of the skyline that people would see every day, and that was what we heard when we were on the ground, that people would miss seeing it every single morning. So those people are now having to reroute through central Baltimore, through those tunnels, and we have seen an uptick in the number of cars using those tunnels as well. The other impact, of course, the economy, the ships, most of them were stopped from being able to get into the main part of Baltimore Harbour because of the wreckage that was stopping the access. And Baltimore is a significant port on the eastern seaboard, particularly for the import of cars from Europe and elsewhere, but also for the import of sugar and lumber and the export of coal as well. So the impact on the economy has been quite important. About $15 million a day in economic activity, it's believed, has been impacted by that, and also about 1,300 jobs as well.
And this is a question I imagine a lot of people in the area want to know. Is there any idea as to when the bridge is going to be rebuilt and open for business?
Well, the investigations are still continuing. The National Transport Safety Board has an investigation ongoing. They released some preliminary findings a few days ago, and the FBI still has ongoing investigations, as does other agencies as well. But now that the thousands of tons of metal have been moved from the bow of the boat and the boat has been moved out, the authorities can start to reopen the port somewhat. We are told it's a limited opening of about a 400 feet wide channel, which is opening, and they are aiming to get that up to the full 700 feet wide crossing by the end of May. But for the bridge itself, it could take a lot longer. We are hearing that it could take almost a decade to rebuild the bridge and get it up and running. Joe Biden has pledged federal money for that, though, and said that all of the money to rebuild that bridge will come from the federal coffers.
Fraser Jackson reporting there. Thank you so much. And coming up, we're going to be heading to the Cannes Film Festival for a bit of glitz and glamour, including a look at David Cronenberg's latest film, The Shrouds. So do stay with us. I'll be back after a short break.
He has a very beautiful smile. He's very cool and sweet.
Look, she's so cute. They are young and charming. Their job, that of an escort. Today, many Japanese men and women choose love on demand, without strings, with solo relationships, which can be non-sexual or even virtual.
Sometimes I say things to Miku, but other times it's just fun to be together and have tea. She's so cute.
My boyfriend is like family, but my virtual friends are my real romantic partners.
This weekend, reporters dive into the world of Japan's new dating rules. Watch Japan Love 2.0 on France 24 and France24.com. special event.
Hello from the Cannes Film Festival. Some of the big names expected this year include Emma Stone, Kevin Costner, Richard Gere and Demi Moore. Join me every day from Cannes for everything you need to know from the most exciting and glamorous film festival in the world.
Arts 24 in Cannes on France 24 and France24.com.
Worldview with Francois Picard. 2 hours of current affairs featuring the debate. Listen to the views that count on all the major international issues.
Join us for Worldview right here on France 24.
WESN.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sierra Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. 5 shot dead in 24-hour spate of violence across TNT. Shigona's East MP slams the National Security Minister over crime. Gary Griffith questions government's decision to terminate SSE head's contract. And internationally, Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup. Now for the details. Within a span of 24 hours, Trinidad and Tobago witnessed a tragic surge in violence as 5 individuals were fatally shot in separate incidents. The victims have been identified as Marcus Williams, aged 44, Kevin Hospitalis, aged 42, Ricky Rupnarine, aged 43, Kendall Hodges, aged 39, and Anthony Marichou. These incidents occurred across both Trinidad and Tobago, with 4 deaths recorded in Trinidad and 1 in Tobago. Former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith is raising concerns over the government's decision to terminate the contract of Major Roger Best, the head of the Strategic Services Agency. Griffith says that the government has not provided justification for Best's dismissal, leaving questions regarding the grounds for his termination unanswered. Shigona's East MP Vandana Mohit has leveled accusations of neglect against the National Security Minister Fitzgerald Hines regarding her constituency. Addressing a UNC press conference held on Sunday at the party's headquarters in Shigonas, Mohit criticized Hines for purportedly failing to take action to combat crime and ensure the safety of citizens. She highlighted the recent abduction of Anisha Hussein, the daughter of Source Doubles proprietor, as a poignant example. Hussein was reportedly kidnapped in El Dorado on Saturday. In international news, the Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup against President Felix Tshisekedi in the capital Kinshasa involving Congolese and foreign fighters. DR Congo Army spokesperson Brig Gen Sylvain Ikenge said that 50 suspects, including 3 Americans and a naturalized British citizen, have been detained. He previously said that on the state-run broadcaster RTNC-TV that the situation is now under control. His statement comes hours after armed men attacked the house of Vital Kamerhe, former chief of staff and close ally of the president, early on Sunday morning. Witnesses say a group of about 20 assailants in army uniform attacked the residence and an exchange of gunfire followed. Well, that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sierra Ali. Thank you for watching.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond
want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why.
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been Late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
WESN.
Change. Nobody really wants to change. Have you ever moved your house? I have never moved myself. I have helped someone move. It wasn't fun. But there are a lot of things where we, potentially as a nation, do not like change. That's not unique to us. And the reason why this is at the top of my mind, coming to work, I realized when I see pedestrians, recently I started to ask myself, are they Trinbagonian or are they Venezuelan? Just curious. To what extent has the immigration been so widespread that it is now, a common occurrence, and the amount of numbers you see on the streets are significant that it's almost as though they're a significant minority of our population. And some people don't necessarily like it because they're the outsiders, and that's, any form of bigotry starts with that. It starts with the outsiders, the others, the people who were not here before. They've taken up our space. They've taken up our jobs. I remember in Tobago, one grocery was raided because, I'm not sure if anybody reported them, but a lot of the cashiers were Jamaicans, Africans, Venezuelans, etc., etc. Tobago actually had quite a lot of immigrants in the workforce doing low-level jobs. And sometimes, you hear the complaints, but then you're like, but these are jobs a lot of the local population don't want to do. At the end of the day, we fear change. That's just one aspect. We definitely fear political change. We rode out Manning and Pandey for quite a while before that pattern was changed. And then, ironically, as Kamala actually ascended to the post of Prime Minister, the next party also swapped out its political leader. Mr. Manning lost elections before, but this time was different. New generation, it took so much to get them out. And now we actually might reach the point where we can see change, but it's almost as though we don't want it. And at the end of the day, you know, they say people fear the unknown, that's why they don't like change. But, and I found a quote that more or less said the same thing that I thought to myself in the car. Really and truly, it's not as though life is going to be stable and unchanging. We just remember the parts that we liked, and we wish that it stayed around. But life wasn't necessarily like that before we experienced whatever that highlight was of the old-time days. It changed to that for a while, and then it changed into something else, and then it eventually changed into what we have now. So the irony of the situation is we don't want change, we fight against change, we fear change, but it's going to happen to us regardless. It's going to be inflicted upon us by just the circumstances of time and the fact that at the end of the day, no human being, for the most part, is going to be exactly the same person they were yesterday, last week, last year. We will all in some way, shape, or form change or have change inflicted upon us, which will then force our hands to change some things, and that domino effect will then change our landscape. And instead of being fearful of change, why don't we try grabbing change by the reins and making active decisions on what will change? Because at the end of the day, one of the things that ironically frustrates me the most is when people declare their frustration with the status quo, except the status quo is almost defended like a sacred cow. Nobody wants to actually challenge it. They just want to complain about it. And someone I knew had to tell me one day, she was getting tired of my complaining about the same issue over and over. Why are you still in a situation that all you do is complain about, but you do nothing about it? You might as well leave. Hence, I can't blame those who have left. And if we don't like that, if we want to see a reverse to that, we don't just tell them, don't go. We need to see something here. We need to see change worth fighting for, worth living for. Why did I go down all this path? Well, there's one main story that got me in this line of thought. What am I speaking about? Let's go to today's daily review. And there have been a candlelight vigil for Anisha Hussain Singh last night in Maracas, St. Joseph. And I will say this up front, I don't have a problem with this vigil. I don't have a problem with people airing out their emotions, their frustrations, their sadness over this. Of course, the family will have their personal stake and emotions that they're feeling and they're suffering, but then also there's the wider community who will, at the end of the day, they will see a victim, they will see her face, and they will be hit with the realization, can't this also happen to someone I know, my friend, my sister, my daughter, my mother? I don't have a problem with the vigil. What I do have a problem is, it seems as though the last time this happened was a couple years ago. Again, over an unfortunate crime from that happened to a young lady. And in between we've had, and I've said this before, and I'm gonna keep saying this because I need a satisfactory answer before I'm gonna stop. In between we've had children dying. and barely a peep. Now, this community is dealing with this crime, and we hope that she's still alive, which in some ways makes it all the more important to be active, to try to do any and everything, no matter how slight and insignificant it might seem, because will her kidnappers have a change of heart when they hear this? Maybe, maybe not. Men who commit such crimes are generally not swayed by the emotions of the victims' families, but sometimes they are. But then perhaps showing the authorities the importance that members of the public put on a specific case could help put pressure on them to act, and then put pressure on the kidnappers to not take things down the path that we hope it doesn't go down, that we hope it hasn't already gone down. But that's this community, that's this family, that's this situation. They're dealing with it. What about the others? Where were the other communities? Some did, not all. And where was the country, and where is the country now? When these things happen, if all we're going to do is complain about it to some extent, and then expect somehow magically different results with the same situation, whose fault then is it at the end of the day? We could blame the government, right? But that's a fool me once, shame on you situation. Fool me twice, shame on me. We complain about them. We complain about what they're doing or not doing. We complain about the lack of results. We complain about the lack of trust and confidence in the authorities, in the police service, in the police leadership, in the criminal justice system. We complain about the politicians and the empty words and the empty promises. Complain, complain, complain. That's fine. But it's similar to when people tell the PNM, don't blame things on a partnership administration that was 8 years ago, 9 years ago now, soon to be 10 years ago. In your first couple of years, that's fine. Blame the outgoing people because you inherited what they left. But into your second administration, then all of a sudden, the mindset has to switch. The last 5 years, at the start of your second administration, was you, not them. And to some extent now, for the public, the concept is the same. A new government comes in, eventually they establish themselves. Once they've reached a point, and it's objective, that they have established themselves, that their policies are now putting a stamp on the situation. If we're not seeing the results we like, we could complain. But the key point is you complain until the next election available. Because unless things get drastic, the population can't recall a government just so. Not in between elections. But then now we're coming up to an election year. And we had an election. We voted the same slate back into office. And we've seen the trends of crime escalating even before this administration. What have we done to break that cycle except complain and hope magically that the people who we complain about will fix the problem? Why does that make sense? Because one of the things that they chanted at the Candlelight Vigil, and again, I'm not blaming them, they say enough is enough. That's cool. But at some point, the sentiments expressed by the population, the complaints by the population, if we do nothing except just complain, it's no different than the empty promises of politicians and the Commissioner of Police saying, we'll redouble our efforts. So the Commissioner saying we'll redouble our efforts. The politicians are saying no stone will be left unturned. And the population is saying enough is enough. We are part of the all talk, no action. We. I mean, a lot of talking coming from me. I appreciate and recognize the irony of that statement. That's true. We are all talk and no action. We just like to say that it's them who's all talk. They are all talk, don't get me wrong. We just can't now try to separate ourselves as though we have this great moral high ground over the politicians. Well, the politicians ain't doing nothing. Politicians, though, they never are wrong. They never do nothing for me. Right, you voted them in. You vote them in once, they do nothing for you, that's on them. You vote them in twice after they've shown you who they are and proved to you that their performance is not satisfactory to you. That's on you. That's on me. And I'm doing everything I can from this platform here that I have been granted for as long as I have it to try to instill one message. And to some extent, you could trace a through line to the start of Talking Point. Do not underestimate these upcoming elections. This is the first general in the history of Talking Point and WSN. So we haven't necessarily had the capacity to speak to it as directly as it is now. We only could have spoken about what happened in the past. And we have seen some things from internal elections and the local government elections that we didn't like, and we saw some things from the tertiary elections that we did like. Because to be fair to Tobago, they didn't just complain. They did something about it. Now, maybe you could say somebody rose up to give them the opportunity, to give them an option. But at the end of the day, we can't just hope for someone to come out of the woodwork to magically just appear at the 11th hour. We need to actively pursue new options if that is what we think we want as a people with a consensus. It's not about if it can be done or not anymore. Let's understand. This is not like, oh, well, if life doesn't work out as best as we hoped, we'll just have a 9-to-5 type of life working retail. This is the entire country's fate we're talking about. You can't just settle on that level for mediocrity. It doesn't work that way. Mediocrity at government means that we will all suffer more than we think. You can't just get average Joes to be the leaders of a country. And too many of our leaders are average Joes. Too many of the leaders internationally are average Joes. Hell, one of them, literally, his name is Joe. And his political opponent is also a rich but average Joe. But it is what it is. We have a year, give or take. This won't be the last time I speak about this. I will continue to speak about it. But as we see crimes like this happen more and more, it's not just all on the police. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to fix the system. The commissioner is just part of the problem. One could even argue she's not the biggest part. One could even argue her appointment might be a symptom. And yes, this is somewhat harsh because I don't have faith in her. But to say that replacing her is going to magically fix anything, that's foolish. That's naive. The problems are bigger than just her office, and the service. This young lady was snatched off the street in broad daylight. And the Chief Secretary, he had something interesting to say about the crimes in Tobago. Tobago is in a social war. We were content, but when you give people an inch, they take a mile, and the criminal element went from controlled warfare amongst themselves to now reckless action by elements who do not have any sort of consideration for people uninvolved. And it causes crime to escalate to heights previously unknown. And we know to some extent part of the law breaking is happening in the services within the Ministry of National Security. And of course, the allegations of corruption throughout the politicians who are in Parliament, there are many and ever growing. And nothing's being done about it. I hope that she's still alive. I hope that they find her safe. Regardless of the outcome, this situation will not be the last like this. So, if enough is truly enough, what are we going to do about it? Let's take a break. We'll continue the daily review and try and get through some important commentary a little bit quicker now. Stay tuned. Sean Michael Small here on the Content Capital, WESN television with a difference. We'll be right back.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Talking Point here on WSN, the Content Capital. And moving on the daily review, there are clues with regards to the deficiencies of our criminal justice system. Some of them in places where we might not necessarily expect. So yesterday, I didn't have time. I wanted to mention a small story in the Newsday about a little exchange between the Minister of Public Utilities and Senator Anna Roberts with regards to the existing fines for offenses with regards to illegal extraction, distribution, and sale of water. Because, you know, a while ago there was an alleged water trucking scandal where it was reported individuals were earning thousands of dollars a day to, well, basically selling people water illegally that they may have gotten from WASA, as well as cutting off their supply from WASA to artificially create that demand. And the problem, of course, is the fine is too small. It's only $750. So to some extent, and this is the funny thing, I don't know how much further judges could take it, because then we get this situation, and I believe that there are too many situations like this. The law doesn't cover it, right? So what happens is, in theory, they'll just keep doing it, because you're basically, for each offense, charging them a fine that is less than potentially a third or a quarter or even a smaller fraction than the amount of money they can make in a day. What's to stop them except having WASA authority officials and police officers to basically block them, to monitor every which way they could carry out that crime. And that's not feasible. And the minister admitted the fine is outdated, the fine is obsolete, it no longer serves as a deterrent to these serious acts. And in this dry season, one could argue this was one of the most serious injustices we saw outside, of course, of murder, etc., etc. And I would argue that what we're seeing with regards to the political bacchanal controversies, like the meritless thing and the audit gate thing, also is in part because the law, there are gaps. And no one could enforce things that aren't there. What is interesting to note, though, I think, is if we then take it a step further, there's then this interesting phenomenon of perceived inequality. Because what will happen is we'll update laws slowly. So people who commit offenses that have new laws with stricter penalties will look at people who commit offenses that have lighter penalties because the laws are obsolete, and they'll be like, why am I fined and imprisoned half of my life, half of my savings, and my lifetime is going to be spent behind bars, half of my savings have to be forfeited for this crime, and then for a similar crime, he gets fined for less than $1,000. And then, of course, it leaves room if, say, the two individuals that are being considered are of different economic backgrounds, geographical origins, they live in different areas of the country, they have different racial backgrounds and or religious backgrounds, and then somebody will craft a narrative, it's because of discrimination and blah, 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 blah. Part of having a fair criminal justice system is to ensure that across the board, all penalties make sense. And that we don't take forever to update things at snail's pace. So some people are being punished, some people are being overly punished and made examples of because it's like this crime, we're going to make examples of them, we're going to put harsh penalties. In the current climate, people want the book thrown at the criminals. And they want harsher penalties for certain crimes. But then other crimes are kind of left under the radar. And ironically, one of the things that will also then cause is criminals are smart. They're like, well, I can make money doing this. The penalties aren't that bad. They'll go there. Less risk, more reward. Makes sense, right? We might see more water trucking scandals and more vandalism to WASA infrastructure, or individuals just turning the pipes off until this is fixed. But then we have to ask, what else? What else is similar to this, is obsolete like this, has a penalty that is as meaningless as this? And to what extent can we trust that it will be fixed? We might get another one fixed in a couple months, in a couple years. After 5 years, we might get a handful of them fixed. By the time half of them get fixed, the first half might be obsolete again for various reasons. Surely we could do better. Surely we could move faster, more efficiently. Surely we could also write laws more comprehensively that we leave out loopholes. Except loopholes is the tool of the corrupt. If transparency is the weapon of democracy, loopholes is the weapon of the corrupt. Next story. And this one is also interesting. It's an interesting debate. I don't know all of the details of how this would work. And of course, I don't know why police officers, they don't have all the reasons why they don't show up. So in some cases, it could be unavoidable for the officers. But everyone's favorite local activist judge, that's with a bit of sarcasm, he might not actually like that, Justice Frank Superstad, he is making a suggestion that police officers who do not attend court, that fail to appear at court, should be fined. They should face some sort of consequence. And to some extent, one would argue that we already should have a reasonable expectation of this happening. But the expectation should be, you don't do your job, your boss will punish you for it internally. What Justice C. Prasad is basically saying is, hold on. Police will be involved primarily with criminal cases. This is a serious matter. If they ain't gonna show, we should fine them. And I do wonder if some jurisdictions, certain states in North America, they might actually be able to fine officers who are supposed to show up, who might be subpoenaed to show up, don't show up. They might fine them in contempt and face punishments that way. He's basically saying court orders are not complied with, and they need something to empower them to force compliance. And that's part of the problem with these loopholes. The obsolete fines that we spoke about just before, there's no teeth in that law. There's no consequence of significance. Now, the level of the fine, what constitutes as a situation that can be fined or should not be fined, all of these details, you know, there's room to figure this out. Putting a blanket fine, oh, you don't show, you pay this hefty fee, I don't know if that will solve the problem or just cause more problems. Part of the issue is, I believe, police officers might actually end up having two court dates, court times scheduled at the same time. And then they're kind of forced, well, which one do I go to? So then it goes into now, there are other issues at play here, not just negligence by police officers, and who knows what other issues that I don't know about because I'm not in that world. But on the surface of it, I like the idea. It's just that if you implement it bad, it might eventually kill the idea when bad outcomes happen because it was not thought out properly and given enough room, reasonable room for situations that are not just officers being irresponsible, negligent, lazy, what have you. Right? But of course, again, you can't just leave lazy loopholes because that's the tool of the corrupt. Next story. Some somewhat good news. We speak about energy, especially with my colleague Karine Shishera on Wednesdays. Dragon gas. Wondering what the private sector's part of it. We know America, to some extent, we don't know exactly affirmatively what their future intentions with dragon gas is. They themselves probably don't know because we're kind of looking at Maduro and wondering, will he go off the rails or not? But we had a deal with Maduro, and now the NGC has apparently, according to Minister Young, Minister of Energy, signed a deal with Shell over the work with regards to dragon gas. This is a big deal. This does not mean that either A, America could decide, we're going to sanction everything anyway, or B, Maduro will do something to the point where no one will question America reimposing heavy sanctions on Venezuela, right? Those two things either and or could happen. But so far, this is still a good indication that there is at least some amount of confidence in the private sector that this thing is moving forward. Because of course, one could argue the private sector is not going to throw good money after bad. Now, we're apparently proceeding full speed ahead, but full speed ahead is relative. But the private sector is not perfect. They don't always get it right. Why do I say that? Let's go straight into the next story. And I had questions with regards to how NIC1 ended. All right? The questions with how NIC1 started at the end of the day, it wasn't necessarily something that I liked, but it was something that I potentially could have lived with. NIC1 is formed up. We have a shortage of natural gas. Somehow they are getting a supply of natural gas. Is there some sort of favoritism? Now, the consequences might be minor, but might still exist for the country's reputation if international agencies can't get gas, but a friend of the administration seemingly can't get gas. But then that changed when the administration said, no more gas. No, we out. 2 industrial accidents, 1 dead, and you can't consistently keep up operations. We out. But the bank stayed in. So what did I just say? Shell, they're on board, sign agreement, NGC for Dragon. Good sign, right? But let's not just all of a sudden somehow think, oh, well, when the private sector is going after something, it automatically means that they know what they're talking about and what they say is the perfect interpretation and decision in that situation. Because I am confused over the private sector with regards to Nikwan. So now I am left wondering, Senator Wade Mark brought this up. Well, I believe he's calling for an investigation of Nikwan. And I'm not necessarily saying that I agree that we have to have it, but I'm curious. Because in this situation, ironically, at least to some extent, and maybe if we go through details, we could nitpick and say, well, the government didn't do all they could do to protect the taxpayers' money that they did invest into this initiative, which may or may not have seemed like a good investment. But to some extent, the private sector went in, say, a kind of think herd mentality. All of these banks went in, the government went in. Is it that, you know, there was a bit of confidence, we're all seeing it the same way, this might be a good investment? Or is it a kind of a shell game? Well, they're confident in it, so then, you know, we should be confident in it. And nobody realized it's like a circle. Everybody's confident because the other person's confident. No one actually knows who's the first one to figure out this might be a good idea, because there might not have been someone to figure out that this might be a good idea. It might just be all of them. Well, there's a term I can't use on public television. But they're all like lemmings. They're assuming that somebody figured it out first when no one did. And their confidence is just based on the other person's confidence, which means that there's no actual reason for the confidence. It's just a shell. And the thing about this, the irony is, one of the things that I thought about was the duty of care for the decision makers in the various financial institutions who didn't just invest in Nikwan initially, but then seeing that the government was unwilling to continue supplying natural gas when Nikwan owed upstream, downstream over $20 million US, just over $20 million US, I think 21 or so, for unpaid monies owed for gas already delivered. Government is saying no more, no more. And the banks are like, yeah, this project's still good. We could still save it. How? I believe it was Minister Young himself who said they don't even have approval to restart from the Ministry of Energy after the last accident. How? Where does confidence came in? So now, the duty of care to the investors of those private institutions, that's my primary concern, ironically, not the duty of care to the taxpayers. The government does have a stake in Nikwan, which makes their decision all the more damning because they're saying, we are going to cut our losses. Here we recognize this situation is bad. And the private sector, at least some members, like Republic Bank, who wanted to prevent Mr. Small, no relation, from winding up Nikwan to collect his 20 million TT. They were like, no, we could still save this. I mean, they might have been in too deep. I get it. But why did they get in too deep to begin with? Where they sold a bill of goods and realized that the world was pulled over their eyes, maybe, maybe not, and now they want to save face. The duty of care now to the shareholders of Republic Bank and other banks. That's my concern. And yeah, why not? Why not investigate them? Because this decision, unless maybe there are details we're not made aware of, make us aware of them, please. Because this is very, very puzzling. This is the kind of thing that will hit shareholder confidence, I would think, but I'm not a shareholder, so I don't know. Okay, let's end things there because I want to kind of wade into some waters that might be controversial because I seem to be somewhat unique in my stance of a small conflict, not the Russia-Ukraine one. You know, it's a much more insignificant conflict. No one's talking about it, you know, anywhere. You know, it's barely known. Honestly, the irony is in and of itself ironic because I think to some extent the commentary on it is overblown, in part because why I think it's inaccurate, but we'll get into that when we come back after this.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have two of the three species of anteaters right here.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the conflict between Israel and Hamas/Palestine, because to some extent, I will admit, I don't know how to classify what it is Israel is doing because it doesn't necessarily make enough sense to me. That has been a very, ironically, it's a situation that's caused a lot of strong opinions in certain parts of the Western Hemisphere. Meanwhile, a much larger war with potentially greater implications for the world happening in Ukraine, opinions not so strong. This far west, and by this far west I mean, you know, North America, the Caribbean, it's a bit obviously Africa is going to look at this situation, particularly Northern Africa. They're going to look at this situation. That's important to them. It could affect them directly, practically. The Middle East, looking at this situation, it could affect them directly, practically. Unfortunately for Europe, especially Eastern Europe, they're kind of caught in the middle of two conflicts. Asia, not so much. And I think for the most part, a lot of Southeast Asia is kind of just going on with their life. They're worried about, you know, what's going on in the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. But of course, this is a big thing here. And I tend to have a different opinion, slightly, to a lot of people who just want to take one side, which bothers me because I don't think that's useful to stopping the violence. It's just useful to have a debate and maybe win an argument depending on whose side the crowd or the audience is with. But then I was pleasantly surprised by the International Criminal Court and what they publicly put out into the world And then I wasn't necessarily surprised by the response it got from a lot of the major stakeholders and political figures involved. So, to get a kind of brief summary of this situation, at least so far up until last night, it's time to cue this.
The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. He says there are reasonable grounds to believe both men bear responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed since the Hamas attacks on October the 7th and the subsequent war with Israel in Gaza. Mr. Netanyahu described the move as absurd. President Biden says it's outrageous. The UK government has called it unhelpful. Lucy Williamson has more.
Today, Israel and Hamas found themselves attacking the same target. Their leaders listed side by side at the International Criminal Court.
International law and the laws of armed conflict apply to everyone. No foot soldier, no commander, no civilian leader. No one can act with impunity.
Prosecutors accuse Israel of a state-sanctioned attack against Gaza's civilian population, including extermination and using starvation as a weapon of war. And Hamas of extermination, hostage-taking, torture and sexual violence, including rape. Tonight, a very personal rebuttal from Israel's Prime Minister.
Mr. Khan creates a twisted and false moral equivalence between the leaders of Israel and the henchmen of Hamas. This is like creating a moral equivalence after September 11th between President Bush and Osama bin Laden.
Hamas also strongly denounced what it said was an attempt to equate the victim with the executioner, and that the Palestinian people, like all those under occupation, had the right to resist. In Israel, the response from across the political spectrum has been outrage. Israel's president said it was scandalous to equate the two sides. One opposition leader called it moral blindness. Those in Mr. Netanyahu's own party said it would only galvanize support.
The Israelis, when they feel that we are under attack, they realize it's not the prime minister who is being attacked. It's the IDF soldiers. It's the citizens of Israel. It's people who care about democracy. People who have moral clarity are under attack. So if you're talking about politically, it would support the prime minister.
Throughout this war, Israel has insisted it's a democratic country with a moral army and a right to self-defense. Seeing its leaders named alongside those of Hamas has sparked widespread outrage here. But the prosecutor is clear. There are reasonable grounds to accuse both sides of war crimes, including crimes against humanity. Outside the Knesset today, Mr. Netanyahu's opponents had gathered to protest his handling of the war. For a prime minister facing such criticism at home, criticism from the International Court might actually help. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Jerusalem.
I think the key phrase in all of that is reasonable grounds. Innocent until proven guilty, that's the standard of any sort of criminal trial. He's not, the prosecutor is not saying, ooh, President of Israel, guilty, or Prime Minister, head of Hamas, guilty. He's saying, I have reasonable grounds to suspect these leaders engage in this, because they're the leaders, they're the decision makers. One of the things that frustrates me is locally people want to side with Hamas because Hamas has the bigger number. And I get that. The irony of it is, in other areas, I will understand and defend decision makers when they are forced to make a decision. Do we make the decision that causes more death or less death? But that's a different situation. That's situations where death is unavoidable. America's in World War II. They make decisions that will lead to death in order to continue on with that war. But it was already a situation where people were going to die, whether the Americans got involved in World War II or not. The question is, are they limiting the amount of people dying by trying to end the war quicker, by trying to have more decisive victories so that the opposing side cannot rearm, rebuild, recruit more of their population and others, because Nazi Germany was bringing in Poles and others into units towards the end, to try to fight, to cause more prolonged conflict and death. That's not this. This is, well, Israel has a small number, Palestine has a big number, therefore Palestine morally correct. Ten murders does not make it right for you to excuse one murder. And that is an implication I don't think a lot of people have realized. Now, first of all, the word genocide in the modern politically ideological context is overused, and it's at risk of becoming a cry wolf situation. If everything's a genocide, well then when we actually have a genocide, it will no longer hold meaning. The number of dead in Palestine, which is reported, which I don't think anyone has legitimately disputed, is large, but it's not genocide. It's large. And within that number, a significant number, but not the entire number, nowhere close, would be made up of Hamas fighters. But I do believe that it is, at least from what I have seen, accepted to be that the majority, I think something like 2/3 is one estimate, is going to be civilians. But let's not forget that Hamas started this. So if we want to say, how could Israel do anything, that's kind of shaky. Now, if we want to say specifically how Israel is doing what they're doing, their implementation is poor, that's different. Because not only is Israel doing something which I don't see personally as effective, but they even put their own citizens who were hostages at risk, which is to me like that's the telling sign that their strategy has some holes in it, to say the least. And the moral superiority that they want to claim, I'm not willing to just give to them. But just because their number is bigger doesn't mean, oh, well, then we let Hamas off the hook. See, people of Palestine, to some extent, how much are they innocent of this? Was this inflicted upon them? One, by their own leaders, and two, by another state, an external force, which is now not showing due consideration to differentiate enough. Because they're going into a situation, yes, I understand, you're going to get civilian casualties if you have conflict in civilian zones, no matter how much you try to get them to evacuate. Of course, then you have to ask, is this necessary to prevent more deaths? And the answer to that, I think in the long run, is going to be considered no. But Israel is stubborn. I do believe they have a right to defend themselves, but how they're doing it is not just a waste of time, but it's also a waste of life. But it feels emotionally good to them because they're doing something. And that is generally the mistakes politicians make. Clausewitz said, war is not merely a political act, but it is a real political instrument, a continuation of political intercourse, a carrying out of the same by other means. War is politics by other means. And that's what we're seeing with regards to the support. And it's putting now a spotlight on the principles or lack thereof of individuals involved. And I would argue that, one, I agree with the ICC, both leaderships. Hamas is not all of Palestine. Let's not forget that. That doesn't say anything about the people of Palestine. Hamas is Hamas. And their leaders and the leaders of the Israeli government, they probably should face tribunals. Now, somebody else weighed in on this, as we came to expect. We have good old Joe weighing in. Let's get this quick before we have to go for the break.
Look, the story of the Jewish people is a story of resilience, absolute resilience, from pain and persecution to hope and to light, even in the darkest times. The story that endures. Throughout our history, Jewish people helped define and expand the singular idea that binds us together as Americans. It's not hyperbole. Freedom. Freedom. And let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian.
So I want to get this in before we have to take a break for news. He is playing politics. He is. Think about it. When his political opponents wanted to ban the Islamic terrorists from coming into the US, oh my gosh, that's so racist. But he's playing to the crowd that's in front of him. He's rejecting the International Criminal Court because of his opinion on a matter, as opposed to let's just let the courts handle it. Let's have the investigation. Let's see where the evidence leads us. Because I don't think anybody, I would be surprised if any true tactician or strategist will say, well, the Israelis are making sound military decisions. Some of what they're doing actually is somewhat sound, but overall, I don't think it is. And I don't see how this is going to get any results. And then, of course, I get it. You need to understand where Israel comes from. It was born out of the Holocaust. That doesn't mean that they get an excuse. Again, the bigger number, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. Yes, tragic. Yes, you factor that in to understand the psychological motivation of a state like Israel. But that's also not an excuse, because the number is bigger. It works both ways. And what happened this year or last year needs to be judged on its own merits this year. Last year. I can't even remember anymore with all these conflicts. They need to be judged on their own merits. And at the end of the day, the prosecutor for the ICC, what he said, he is not just thinking about this case, which is important, but like I said about other situations, he's thinking about the precedent set for the future. He closes the statement on their website. Let us today be clear on one core issue. If we do not demonstrate our willingness to apply the law equally, if it is seen as being applied selectively, we will be creating the conditions for its collapse. In doing so, we will be loosening the remaining bonds that hold us together, the stabilizing connections between all communities and individuals, the safety net to which all victims look in times of suffering. This is the true risk we face in this moment. Now more than ever, we must collectively demonstrate that international humanitarian law, the foundational baseline for human conduct during conflict, applies to all individuals and applies equally across the situations addressed in my office and the court. This is how we will prove tangibly that the lives of all human beings have equal value. Meanwhile, politics is being played, and some of the activists and the people who egg on the activists, who generally have a one-sided message, whether pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, are being caught up in the politics, and they're not seeing the true risks of the situation, because this is a that is also a cycle. Everybody says that they are conducting a reprisal for the violence that was inflicted upon them the last time. They probably can't remember who started the violence anymore. It's just that when one commits violence, violence is committed in response. And then there's a response to that, and it goes in a circle. Meanwhile, the politicians use the situations to whatever advantage is available to them, whether it is to placate their financiers or to advance their agendas. But the ICC, I believe, is one of the few institutions that's actually looking at this in a balanced manner. And again, they're not pronouncing guilt. Everybody else's opinion is an absolute. The ICC is not dealing in absolutes. They're just saying, reasonable grounds, let's have trials. News next. We open up the phone lines after that.
here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sierra Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. 5 shot dead in 24-hour spate of violence across TNT. Shigona's East MP slams the National Security Minister over crime. Gary Griffith questions government's decision to terminate SSA head's contract. And internationally, Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup. Now for the details. Within a span of 24 hours, Trinidad and Tobago witnessed a tragic surge in violence as 5 individuals were fatally shot in separate incidents. The victims have been identified as Marcus Williams, aged 44, Kevin Hospitalis, aged 42, Ricky Rupnarine, aged 43, Kendall Hodges, aged 39, and Anthony Marichou. These incidents occurred across both Trinidad and Tobago, with 4 deaths recorded in Trinidad and 1 in Tobago. Former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith is raising concerns over the government's decision to terminate the contract of Major Roger Best, the head of the Strategic Services Agency. Griffith asserts that the government has not provided justification for Best's dismissal, leaving questions regarding the grounds for his termination unanswered. Shigona's East MP Vandana Mohit has leveled accusations of neglect against National Security Minister Fitzgerald Hines regarding her constituency. Addressing a UNC press conference held on Sunday at the party's headquarters in Shigonas, Mohit criticized Hines for purportedly failing to take action to combat crime and ensure the safety of citizens. She highlighted the recent abduction of Anisha Hussein, the daughter of Source Doubles proprietor, as a poignant example. Hussein was reportedly kidnapped in El Dorado on Saturday. In international news, the Democratic Republic of Congo Army says it has quashed an attempted coup against President Felix Tshisekedi in the capital Kinshasa involving Congolese and foreign fighters. DR Congo Army spokesperson Brigadier Sylvain Ikengi said that 50 suspects, including 3 Americans and a naturalized British citizen, have been detained. He previously said that on the state-run broadcaster ICNTT that the situation is now under control. His statement comes hours after armed men attacked the house of Vital Kamerhe, former chief of staff and close ally of the president, early on Sunday morning. Witnesses say a group of about 20 assailants in army uniform attacked the residence and an exchange of gunfire followed. Well, that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sierra Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back to Talk About, ladies and gentlemen, here on WESN, the content capital. Me, Sean Michael Small, not always going to give you what you want to hear. At times will give you something that you don't want to hear, but that's the point of Talking Point. To dig a little deeper with regards to solutions, it all comes back down to what we're going to do in the next election. But also to recognize that at times, I believe that so much nuance is missed. That's why I wanted to say what I said about what's going on with Israel and Palestine, and what I see with some of the commentary. You want to stop the killing? We need to get both sides to stop, not one side to stop. It takes 2 to tango in this particular dance. There are 2 dancers here. It's a duet. Let's not get it twisted. Both sides need to stop. And the ICC, I think, is doing what it is that needs to be done someone has to intervene in a strong way and not just ask, please stop, please sir, no more, stop. That's not going to work. Not if something this deep. We open up the phone lines, want to hear from you, the viewer. You can give your 2 cents about the Israel-Palestine situation. We have been more involved than I think we should be, not because, you know, the situation isn't worthy of consideration. Rather, our ability to affect it is only so much. And more importantly, we have our own problems that we can't deal with. We're going to dictate the moral high ground to others. But that's just me. But you could also call in on other things. I know that some of my callers got emotional on different topics yesterday for different reasons. One, out of frustration with a situation that they observed. One, out of frustration with commentary that he heard, which I will say I do believe he was ascribing motivations that weren't there. He did say he thinks it was a Freudian slip. I still disagree. But I appreciate the passion because, at the very least, it wasn't a poorly thought out opinion. We have a call on the line. First call of the morning. Good morning, caller on the air.
Hi, yeah. Good morning.
Morning.
Is it any surprise that with respect to the ICJ, the persons who might be accomplices is saying that the charge, the call for certain people to be brought to book is outrageous? And we hear from the accomplices loud and clear.
Yeah. Thank you, caller. Yeah, I mean, this sort of situation, to what extent, the problem is international conflict is messy, right? So liability could almost be never-ending if we wanted to judge it like we would judge a matter within a single country. It's hard to do so because it's not practical. International relations, the relationships between countries are very much, we need to always understand, every country has their own agenda. Some things, though, are a little bit special. When it comes to America and Israel, that's different because of the large Jewish population in America and the sort of views. But that umbilical cord has been cut once before. But I do find that Mr. Biden, because at one point I believe he was withholding weapons from Israel, and then now we're saying, oh, the ICC is out of bounds. I don't like this look. I don't like this look at all. And I found that, yes, from the jump, America should have used better language to try to caution Israel. Listen, understand the need to defend yourself. How is this going to prevent things happening in the future? And more importantly, and again, the smoking gun to me is, if Israel didn't care about their own hostages, like what is the whole strategic purpose of the attacks? Ironically, if America found itself in a similar situation, I do believe they would have handled it differently. They would have gone to try to rescue the hostages, whether successful or not, first, and the public would definitely not let their leaders get away with ignoring American citizens as hostages while committing military action against the hostage takers. We have St. Augustine on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on here. Go ahead, caller. You're on here.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I could call about any topic I call concerning coming back from the ferry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And coming back from the ferry in the night, that crossing situation, when people have to run across the road and traffic coming from east, west, north, and south, and the press button for the light for the bell to come on not working. What is that? Every year you're hearing a budget to put a walk over there. Every year you're hearing that continuously from the it's for somebody to get bounced down for the. I mean to say they can't initiate one policeman there in the night for people to cross properly. They want to know where the coordination. The boat coming in 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, or whatever time. 1 or 2 policemen there for people to facilitate people to cross the road.
Yeah.
Not until it has a fatality, you will hear this, you will be we supposed to do this, we would like to do this, and we will do this. That's my concern.
Thank you, caller. And I'll add on to that, because I have taken the ferry multiple times, at least in the past, when I was living in Tobago, going back and forth. And I would, at times, come in at night, so I have waited at the port after the 8 o'clock ferry. A lot of people leave quick, fast. And then you have people who are still maybe waiting to be picked up or what have you. They could be targets. The port police, I don't know if the port police could deal with traffic, and I don't know to what extent the port police properly secure the port at that time or have the capacity to do so against any potential criminal acts. But not just for crossing. I think it would also be a good idea to have a couple of police officers during that last ferry to ensure that nothing untoward happens, as well as, it's a very important point, to help guide and oversee the flow of traffic and help pedestrians cross safely. Because it's very realistic what it is you're saying. They did a crossing for sea lots, that's way down the road and not necessarily practical. Trainees ain't gonna take that out of the way crossing to be safe. They'll try and go over highways with no intersections and traffic lights if they could. We have a caller from Chaguanas. Good morning, caller, you on the air. Morning.
I would really like to know what is the reasons that they believe that Israel has committed war crimes. When this thing started, it started with an illegal act, right? It wasn't a war. They just blockade the people place and start to kill people, rape people, do all kind of things that are crimes. Not only that, they continue doing it. Up to now, the various Muslim countries keep shelling Israel. Not only that, they shell in international waters and damaging people who are no part of the conflict. Vessels were sunk up to recently. Right? So there is enough evidence I could see for war crimes against Hamas. I would like to know, always, any war you always have individual soldiers conducting improper action. But when we come into war crimes against a nation is where it is condoned by the people in charge. You have any idea what is the evidence they have against Israel?
I don't know what the evidence is. I don't know what the evidence is. And that's why I said, I'm not pronouncing anybody guilty of war crimes. I'm just saying I agree with the ICC.
No, I am pronouncing.
One thing
what these people doing, and they have not denied it, is straight war crimes. What the Muslim people is doing. And not only Hamas, Hezbollah, all of them is doing the same thing.
Let me give you an example, right? There are two wrongs in this example. What happens is, and we don't know which came first, Hamas will have its artillery near a school or hospital, and they'll shell Israel. Wherever they shell Israel doesn't matter. And then Israel will fire back at the artillery that's near a school and a hospital. Now, I believe both sides are wrong in this case. One, Hamas
I don't see why they're wrong. If they're shooting from there, and their people sit down and allowing them to do it, how would that come up?
Well, first of all, I don't know that Palestinians have the capability to disallow Hamas.
That's not what our capability. I have seen no attempt.
Well, because I'm pretty sure Hamas has more guns than the average civilian in Palestine.
Oh, that is always the case with any country with the army.
Right, but Hamas is not a free democracy kind of situation.
That I know. What
Right,
does
so-
that have to do with the question?
No, but so you brought it up, Professor. You brought up the fact that they made no attempt.
I am saying they make no attempt.
I don't think
And
they
you-
can.
Why?
Because violence is going to be the consequence, and they don't have the capacity to resist that violence.
They see people who raping people coming across the border, nobody can do nothing about it.
No. I'm talking about.
I not even hear them talking about it.
I'm talking about. I thought you meant Palestinians stopping Hamas from doing things like trying to fight next to hospitals and schools.
Well, of course.
Right? No, I don't think the average Palestinian...
evidence when the time come out.
But Professor, let me get through the example. The example I'm making is, one side is using human shields, the other side is completely disregarding, or at least reach the point where they seem like they completely disregard human shields. And we get...
So, now if I'm trying to bring a human shield and come into attack your side, you can't do nothing about it?
Well, technically speaking, if a criminal has a hostage and is using them as a human shield, the police can't shoot through the hostage.
Really?
Well, no, I'm pretty sure the police are not supposed to shoot through the hostages, Professor.
You know many times the policemen try to shoot past the hostage, and the hostage...
And depending on the circumstances, it's subjective. They get in trouble for it.
I know.
They get in trouble for it, and it's
but
the same
thing.
thing.
But did you hear any Palestinian try to do it? You see, you're talking about success, I'm talking about attempt. You always say you're getting government you deserve.
Yeah, but the thing with regards to dictatorships, for the average citizen, I don't know if it's that simple. To what extent do the North Koreans actually opt into North Korea? Especially these generations now. They might be paying for decisions made by previous generations.
I have no doubt.
Right, they don't have a choice in that, Professor. The Iraqis, as much as they eventually came to dislike America, when America went in 2003, they celebrated Saddam's being toppled, his dictatorship. The majority were oppressed by him. They didn't necessarily, I think the Kurds tried after 91.
Some people always support the winner.
It's not just supporting the winner. The Kurds tried to have an uprising against Saddam in 91. They didn't have enough firepower. They were basically stomped down because nobody helped them when they tried to do it, which was after the Gulf War to liberate Kuwait. So I'm not going to blame the people caught in a dictatorship.
I don't blaming the people as a whole. I am saying not a single body. Look in America when things were done and whatnot. There are plenty of people who criticize the government.
Yeah, but I think in this case, Professor, you can't necessarily say, well, a fault negates a fault. Right?
No, I didn't say no fault negates no fault.
And the thing is, how Israel is conducting, you don't want to have to commit military action in an urban center. And they're opting into, for all intents and purposes, no matter how much they try to control it, a situation that is leading to civilian casualties. And the fact of the matter is...
But if the other people who attack you go in the middle of civilians,
right,
and the civilians stay there and let them hide among them. And this has been going on for years, long before this. They will go on top of apartment buildings.
Yes.
And shoot into Israel. What is Israel supposed to do?
The thing is, though, it would be as if the police go into East Port of Spain and just shoot up the place without actually trying to solve the situation. I don't think Israel is solving the situation.
But you see, with any problem you have to find out why you have the problem. And I have gone into detail and show you why the problem in East Port of Spain was created by government.
Okay, maybe that was a bad example. But Professor, in a situation like this, one of the obvious goals to stop Hamas would be to get after the leadership, whether you apprehend them or you eliminate them. Right?
But that is what they're trying to do.
Yes, but from what we understand, Hamas's leadership isn't even in Gaza. So at best, they're killing foot soldiers.
You can't win the next country and say this fellow supporting Hamas, so you're going and kill him. Although Israel has done that.
But at the end of the day, I understand in theory you are correct. When we look at World War II, civilian population centers were bombed.
I never went killing anybody.
Right, I get that. But the specifics of this situation is the tactic might be unnecessary because it's ineffective, and I do hazard, I guess, a lot of people would have determined it probably would have been ineffective before it was initiated. I mean, that's my general premise. I don't see it being effective, so I see it being very wasteful.
What do you mean not being effective?
Not effective.
What do you mean not being effective? Why do you think everybody making all this?
Because at this point, at this point, in 10 years, there will be either Hamas will continue or its replacement will continue doing the same thing.
Well, they have been doing that
Right.
for hundreds of years.
And history, Israel's own history in the last 2 decades have shown that their response to Hamas has not been an effective deterrent to Hamas.
Really?
Hamas still exists and continues to kill the Israelis. So
and why it is that Hamas want ceasefire and they keep it holding the hostage?
yeah, they'll take the ceasefire now and then they will bring back the violence.
You take hostage illegally. It's
I
not
know,
prisoners
yes,
of war.
I don't, and that's, hold on, and that's why I agree with the ICC. I'm not saying Israel is wrong and Hamas is right. I'm saying,
you can't agree with the ICC. What is the evidence they have against Israel?
well, they have reasonable grounds. I
What
want
do
to
you
see
mean
the
reasonable
trial, and then it could come out publicly.
When I go
Professor,
out,
I have another caller waiting, so
Okay, thank you.
I have to go. But thanks for the discussion. I understand to some extent where you're coming from, but we weren't actually debating the ICC's position per se. San Fernando, the line. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I'm calling back from continuing from yesterday. I want to say to the head of this Tobago Civil Net from yesterday that my comment was not a Freudian slip. I want him to know that. I have no unconscious bias against Fali's administration, against Tobago. I am just commenting on what I see that is happening in Tobago, and I have a right to do that. You there, sir?
Would you
Yes.
say that this seems to be something common amongst all politicians in the country, that they try to control things? Because to me, it seems like every politician in power wants to kind of have a say on the police, have a say on the EMA, etc., etc.
Yes, but my thing is, my issue is that the justification for doing what they do is what is worrying. The other people did it, so we could do it too.
No,
that situation.
I don't know. I don't know in this situation if they have actually said that. We might ascribe that to them.
Obviously you have not listened to.
Maybe not. I have not seen
the comments. The comments by the Secretary for Infrastructure.
Well,
the Secretary for Infrastructure is blatant in his contempt
Wasn't he removed?
for the institutions of Trinidad and Tobago, for the institutions that as far as he's concerned, once these institutions get in the way of him trying to do something or the administration trying to do something, whether or not the institution is correct, he opposes it.
Okay,
but that is the same gentleman. Hold on, Sean. This is the same gentleman who said 2 weeks into when Hamas went into Israel and caused that debacle, what we are observing now. 2 weeks into that, he on a Tobago morning show made a comment about some issues in Tobago, and he said sometime in the future, quoting him here, that Trinidad and Tobago may have to do to Trinidad what Hamas did to Israel. That man made that comment, and I was so upset that a lot of people, a lot in the news fraternity, did not take that man to task for that comment.
I'll be honest. That is a kind of a comment. I would wonder. I don't know if I would want to even entertain the thought, but I will just say this. I understand what you're saying.
It has to be. Comments like that have to be opposed.
Yes, we should challenge it. Yes.
And challenge.
No, caller.
So my situation is with Tobago. You think I want the best for Tobago? You know, I am like Vanas James. You know, I am a follower of Vanas. Vanas understands what needs to be done, and is trying to do it, and trying to do it within the law, and that is what that man needs to understand.
Okay, I just want to say this.
Within the law.
I just want to say this quick before you go. With regards to the policing, though, I do think Farley is in an odd situation where he is viewed as an executive higher than a normal local government situation, and to some extent, Tobago will look to him to do something about the crime problem, but he could only do so much. So that is the flip side to it. Right? Again, I'm not saying how much you should be able to do about it. I'm just saying this is a complex problem and we need to actually work out a solution, not just assume things, assume no, assume yes, assume the status quo, etc., etc.
Yeah, but on the crime front, as I said to you previously, this that happened in Tobago now was allowed to happen by citizens of Tobago, because remember I told you that I knew when they were buying the guns in Tobago 5 and 6 years ago.
Well,
and they were accumulating it.
Let me cut you there, because we have Tobago on the line, and I don't.
Yes.
I don't want
to. Let me say this one time before we go. Watson Duke said there are shootings every day in Tobago. And there are shootings every day in Tobago. Watson Duke said that 2 days ago.
Yeah. I wanted to limit the amount of fuel on the fire. Now we welcome Tobago, who I assume is here to respond and give his opinion. Tobago, good morning. You're on the air.
And good morning, Sean. How are you this morning?
Well, I mean, having some spirited debates over some important topics. I'll just say that, important topics.
I'm not here to rake you over the coals or anything like that. It just so happens that I just tuned in to wesn, and as soon as I tuned in, this gentleman calls in on the phone and talks about the head of CivilNet. When I called in on yesterday's show, and this is for the gentleman particularly, I would really appreciate if he stops doing that. When I called in on yesterday, I called in under my own power. Before I was the head of CivilNet, I was who I am, and I've been that way now for going on 60-something years, all right? So when I call in on wesn, unless you have me on your show as the chair of CivilNet because you want CivilNet to view and things of that nature, then I'm representing CivilNet. But when I call in, I'm calling in just like that gentleman calls in. I don't know what he's the head of. I'm not going to tag him as the head of his household and he's calling as the head of his household. You see what I'm saying? So I need him to stop doing that. He could refer to the gentleman from Tobago. You know my name, Rodney Piggott. You see my name all over the place there. He could call my name if he wants to. But stop tagging CivilNet, because my views that I give are my personal views.
Yes.
They're not a consensus view
yes.
that CivilNet has met, and the board and everything and the members have met, and we've agreed on this particular view. Because I don't want people to take what I say as this is what CivilNet's position is. And that's what he does when he tags my views as coming from the head of CivilNet, all right? So
yes.
That's poor on that part. Other than that, I mean, he's entitled to his opinion. I'm entitled to mine. We all know that there is a problem in the nation. And that problem, there's a problem between Trinidad and Tobago. There is a problem there.
Yeah.
Unless we realize that problem and admit that problem, we are not going to be able to address it. So let's stop sticking our head in the sand. And that problem is not necessarily just at the governmental level. The point I'm making is that it is at the citizens level also. All right? So just as you point out that citizens say this about Trinidad and so forth, Trinidad's residents in Trinidad say things about Tobago that they have some sort of unconscious bias, or bias that they're not consciously aware of, that they bring to their conversations. That's the point I was making. All right?
Thank you, caller. I will also want to back up your first comments, because in speaking to the caller, I don't necessarily want to continue using your name just because technically the calling segment is supposed to be on conditions of anonymity. So if you want to identify yourself, you're within your rights to do so. Generally speaking, I will still, for the most part, refrain so that it's not continued on. With that said, speaking to the caller off air in his other capacities, he has made that point before, that at times he will speak with his own personal opinion and he cannot speak for CivilNet, so he will not speak for CivilNet, right? So that is fair. Now, in defense of Mr. San Fernando, you are unique, sir, Mr. Tobago, in that regards. Not a lot of individuals will say, hold on. There are times when I speak for my organization, and there are times when I speak in my personal capacity, and those are not always the same things, because when I speak for my organization, my responsibility is to all of the members and stakeholders involved and the consensus that we as a collective generate. And I, in a leadership position, cannot just dictate what the organization's position is. That is not the norm. So I can understand if Mr. Santana made, I don't even think he made an assumption. I just think he didn't necessarily think it through to that extent. I do believe he also most likely did not want to use your personal name, but he wanted to ensure that those who knew who he was referring to. And I don't necessarily think, and I think as a subconscious assumption, most of the time we look at a leader of organization X and they speak. To what extent is that the consensus of the organization based on all of the relevant people involved giving their opinion and coming to a consensus collectively as a decision as a whole, right? That, I don't think that's the norm. It should be. It should be. The political leader of a political party should not just dictate the party's position to the membership. The prime minister as the political leader should not dictate to some extent the positions of the party. Sometimes they have to break the tie and, you know, a consensus can't be made, so they have to put their foot down. I get that, right? But too often, and more so to other parties, I suspect, and other organizations, the leader dictates. The members have to just follow and say, I follow the words of the leader. Sound familiar? And that, unfortunately, is too much of the norm. And you say, having the integrity to identify, look, I have my own opinions, and I will not put them, and I will not use my position to kind of shield me and to give my personal opinions more weight and credence, because I understand the responsibility of that, of speaking on behalf of any organization. So when I want to put my own ideas out there, I will put my own ideas out there on the basis of me, the individual. I'm not using them as a crutch or a shield for clout. And I appreciate that. With that said, with regards to the issues with Tobago, I think this is just off the cuff based on what you said. I think the problem is the people of Tobago might have an active bias because of their experience. Obviously, you live in Tobago, you will experience things that affect Tobago, right? Good or bad, other. I think the problem is too many Trinidadians kind of disregard Tobago. They don't really consider Tobago enough, you know, and I get it. To what extent do you consider Mayaro, do you consider Point Fortin, do you consider Toco, right? And one could argue they themselves don't get the proper consideration, but Tobago has other types of challenges that the other parts of the country does not have because it's a separate island. It makes things more complicated. It makes the crime situation in some ways more complicated, in some ways simpler, in theory. And you're right, ultimately it does come down to the citizens being caught up and not necessarily always being the best informed to then engage in the debate. But I think I will put more responsibility on the politicians because politics is being played for this, at the cost of, one, the standard of living for Tobagonians, and two, the relationship between the two islands. Politics is being played, right? Some of it is almost unavoidable because of the immaturity of how we engage in politics. Our politicians not having a similar sort of mature mindset to understand the responsibility of being a spokesperson for an organization and what it means, and not shielding themselves. I mean, they use Parliament as a shield all the time, apparently. Or at least they try to. And then, of course, the complexities of having so much of the government being based in Trinidad, the central government, so much of the central government being made up of Trinidadians, because Tobago is so small. So practically, how do you increase the ratio to be practical without going overboard? All of those things. There's a lot of things with regards to government and Tobago I think is debatable. And I said this before a while ago. I do wish to see more representation in Parliament for Tobago. And I thought something in the Senate might be the easiest solution. Making more MPs might not make more sense because of population levels. But more senators for Tobago, something, a minister for Tobago, maybe. It's a complex situation. And I think that most of the political parties involved are playing politics. I try not to judge the chief secretary and everything he says in the lens of the audio tape scandal, but that does still exist, and unfortunately it's not implied, it's not alleged, his voice was there. So that's in the back of my mind, but when he has messages, I try to judge his messages on the basis of his message, unless it's something that is directly related and could be directly undermined, but the questions still remain. So I think to some extent, even the TPP is playing politics with Tobago autonomy, with the relationship between the islands, and of course, obviously the PNM is. And the UNC that's a whole mess with regards to their relationship with Tobago. As for the rest of the political landscape, they haven't necessarily engaged with Tobago yet in any meaningful way that I know of, so I don't have an opinion on it, I can't speak to it. And therein, more or less, lies my general, ironically shortened, I've been ranting about it for a few minutes, take on the situation. I appreciate your thoughts on that. Yes, it's a problem. It's subtle, and that's what makes it part of the complex and difficult, because it's subtle. Now, I am way over time, again, so want to thank all of my callers for engaging in the debate. Still want to call people, elections are coming up. What are we going to do about it? Is enough really enough? Make today a good day, as my co-host always says. Remember your allegiance to the Republic. We will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
WESN. The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services, yeah.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
Fan Zone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. As part of the new European Bauhaus, the Green Deal's urban pillar, this communal urban garden, one of 33 in Tallinn, will allow local residents to grow their own food. It's alongside the route for a 13-kilometre-long pollinator highway built on disused land, linking central Tallinn to the Green Belt.
When this kind of former industrial or brownfield area opens up, the city has a choice how to develop it. And I think that by choosing to create a park, a linear park, the city will contribute into creating a better habitat for people.
Despite its green ambitions, Estonia still relies on oil shale for half of its electricity, one of the dirtiest power sources on Earth. The overall sector represented 22,000 jobs at its peak. Tallinn, though, has vowed to phase out oil shale by 2035. To compensate, Estonia will receive €354 million from the EU's Just Transition Fund that aims to support the decarbonisation of Europe. The NEO factory is one beneficiary. It'll produce magnets for electric vehicles. The plant will create 1,000 jobs. The firm received an €18 million grant from the JTF.
Customers are asking businesses like ours to establish supply chains in Europe as fast as possible and as big as possible. But in order to do that in the time frame required, you need to support the economics with these grants.
Regions like this are a typical example of the challenges facing heavy industry in Europe. For European Commissioner Elisa Ferreira, the EU has a responsibility to provide solutions as it pushes ahead with its green goals.
It is important that we very quickly present to workers, present to people, to citizens, a prospect that immediately solves their problems. I think it's important that we keep this time frame and that we do everything possible with a lot of energy within this time frame because it is an opportunity.
But for many Estonians, like many Europeans, the fear is that the green transition is making the cost of living more expensive. 70% of Estonians say that inequalities must be addressed at the same time as climate-neutral policies. Estonia created a new Ministry of Climate last year. Kristen Michal's task is to convince voters that Tallinn's objective for 100% renewables is realistic and desirable.
I usually ask the question that, does your voters have the solar panels on your houses? Usually do. They are not fighting against this kind of renewable energy. Do your voter like, let's say, cheaper energy compared to much expensive energy which comes from the fossil? The answer is probably yes. So these are all very practical things. you like cheaper energy, you like new jobs, you like more added value. These are very economical questions to modern productions.
Europe's race to be green, though, has to overcome doubts in places like Chemnitz in eastern Germany. German car makers have had factories here for almost a century, but that's now the past. The EU wants to phase out combustion engines by 2035. At this gathering of European regions dependent on the automobile sector, the message is clear. Yes to the phase-out, as long as the EU foots part of the bill.
In Saxony, we are already in the process of converting the economy and the automotive industry to electromobility, and there will, of course, be upheavals. There will be one or two companies that will have major problems. But there are also huge opportunities, and we just have to take advantage of these opportunities. And for this, we also need government help.
Europe's car sector employs 13 million people across the EU and contributes 7% of the EU's GDP. Last year, the car lobby succeeded in watering down EU emissions targets amid concerns that tight regulations hand an advantage to Chinese and US competitors. The European Automobile Manufacturers' Manifesto calls for the tools to remain competitive, including a just transition plan specifically for the industrial sector.
So with regards to the Green Deal, our industry is asking for a complementary industrial deal that also understands the logic of the European automobile value chain, and with that equally looks into decarbonizing Europe, but also making sure that Europe remains to be a strong industrial player globally. Are we saying we should copy what the US or China is doing? We don't do that, but rather look into the strength of Europe and try to develop that so that we can remain competitive also in the future.
While Europe is aiming for a greener future, it's also trying to reverse the impact of generations of heavy industry. Poland is on the front line of that revolution. 3 of the 10 highest polluting power plants in the EU are Polish. The EU's Just Transition Fund is providing €3.85 billion to accompany the end of coal in 6 regions in the country. This coal-fueled plant in Konin once provided 10% of Poland's electricity.
This unit uses about 7,000 tons of coal each day, depending on the load.
The coal plant is due to close at the end of 2025, with plans for a nuclear power plant to be built on the site within a decade.
We see what the global trends are. Renewable energy is the dominant trend now. So unfortunately, this lignite-based energy industry must be phased out, and this change must take place.
Coal use in Poland is at an all-time low, but still supplies 61% of the country's energy needs. A few kilometers away, this new plant is part of the alternative.
This is the storage facility for the biomass, which comes from wood chip.
Locally sourced biomass is burned, and the goal is to produce green hydrogen, a cleaner alternative to coal.
This energy transformation process needs to have a positive impact. Its aim is to create a modern, environmentally friendly energy industry, producing electricity and heat energy, but in the context of zero-emission production.
Replacing coal here has forced the operator ZPAC to turn to biomass, hydrogen, solar and wind farms to compensate, as well as eventually the nuclear plant. This plant's first hydrogen electrolyzer will receive €3.5 million from the EU.
It's amazing. If we look at it overall, without losing any properties, we'll produce the same amount of electricity and the same amount of heat energy. But we're not causing climate destruction.
The green transition, though, is a source of enormous upheaval in the region. Open-cast lignite coal mines have provided thousands of well-paid jobs for generations of workers. This is the Dolores excavator, a now dormant giant that once chewed up the landscape of central Poland.
Everyone thought coal would be mined here until the end of the world and a day longer, but unfortunately, it's not what happened.
Alicia Messerschmidt is a trade union leader who was forced to embrace the change. She helped negotiate a secure future and an equivalent salary for the thousands of mine workers, a reskilling plan funded with €45 million from the EU.
We have 9 partners who will guide these people through this difficult period as they look for jobs with a new employer or retrain or start their own businesses. We're offering security for these 2,200 people. None of them will be left without any help.
Here in eastern Wielkopolska, the region received 415 million euros from the Just Transition Fund. For the past 5 years, Maciej Sitek has headed a task force to ensure that the mine closure didn't lead to an economic catastrophe.
The most important goal for the next 10 years is to create a new identity for the region. I am proud of the fact that I live in a place where the region will get something more, that has modern technologies. We expect to get a nuclear power plant, and that we will create a market for small and medium-sized businesses, and people will want to be here.
Regions like this are a vital demonstration of the EU's value, imposing strict environmental regulations and providing concrete solutions. For local social activist Agata Kuzminska, failure to act here would provoke yet more resentment directed towards Brussels.
For the first time, I had the impression that EU funds for development were directed towards us, and that we were the intended beneficiaries, and that it wasn't just a source of financing for the construction of new roads, new bridges, renovations, or infrastructure. It was the first time that they seemed to realize that the answers must be delivered to people, that there has to be a social dimension in this process.
Krzysztof Lewandowski is one example of that fair solution. He was part of the team of operators on the Dolores excavator. But after a decade working in the mine, his well-paid job was scrapped. Despite the upheaval, he has few regrets.
If I could turn back time, if I had the choice of either continuing to sit in the mine, stuck in this relic of the past, or being given the chance to start a new life, well, in my opinion, this is a better life.
In all, the EU helped fund the reskilling of 5,500 workers from the lignite industry. Now Krzysztof works as a solar panel installer, a job with a future.
We saw what was happening. The world is moving forward. But this green energy, we know it will always be there. Coal is an outdated heating source. There wasn't any sadness when they closed. There wasn't any disappointment. Things had to change.
With solar panels on many roofs, renewables represent 27% of Poland's power generation. From homes to factories, farms to mines, the Green Deal has already left a mark on Europe. The EU still, though, wants renewable power to reach 42.5% by 2030.
He has a very beautiful smile. He's very cool and sweet.
Look, she's so cute. They are young and charming. Their job, that of an escort. Today, many Japanese men and women choose love on demand, without strings, with solo relationships, which can be non-sexual or even virtual.
Sometimes I say things to Miku, but other times it's just fun to be together and have tea. She's so cute.
My boyfriend is like family, but my virtual friends are my real romantic partners.
This week in Reporters, dive into the world of Japan's new dating rules. Watch Japan Love 2.0 on France 24 and France24.com.
Stay in touch on Night Watch with Alexander Rocotte and James Mulholland. Get all the facts and insights on recent world events.
The news